Hey guys, tonight, we slip into a world where your voice is muffled, your body policed, and even your thoughts might count as heresy. You're a woman in the Middle Ages, somewhere between property and parable, between temptation and tragedy. You've never seen a mirror that doesn't lie, because the only reflection allowed is the one painted by men with power. This is a time when rules weren't just written in law books. They were braided into your hair, sewn into your hemline, and whispered behind your back the second you left the room. And you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is right now, because nothing says community like shared insomnia and morbid curiosity. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in a village where thatched roofs lean like old men, and the local priest smells faintly of damp wool and boiled onions. The midwife is hunched but precise, her hands scrubbed in ash and herbs. You arrive slick and wailing, your first sound a protest. But no one hears that part. What they see is your tiny female form blinking into a world already stacking rules on your chest like stones. Your birth doesn't guarantee celebration. A boy, that's lineage labor land. A girl, that's a dowry problem. A womb with no title. Your mother wraps you tight, hums something soft in Old French or Low German, and already knows the life she's passing on. By the time you're weaned, you've learned silence, not taught, absorbed like smoke from the hearth. Boys spit, scream, chase pigs. Girls fetch hush and carry secrets with the same ease they carry water. Your first toys are also your first lessons. A little broom, a rag doll with no mouth sewn on. If it has lips, someone might ask why she's using them. You watch as older girls lower their gazes whenever men speak. It's like a muscle trained, flexed, expected. One girl doesn't lower hers fast enough and is labeled bold. Not a compliment, more like a warning. Historians still argue whether this social scripting came more from the pulpit or the plow. Was it religious doctrine or rural pragmatism that made girls invisible? The answer is probably yes. In towns, it's a little different. Maybe. There's more noise, more spectacle. But the rules are still carved in the corners. City girls might learn to read, especially if their fathers are merchants. But reading isn't power. Not yet. Just another thing to hide when men walk in the room. You hear tales of saints who starved themselves wholly. Catherine of Siena refuses food and bleeds for Christ. It's heroic, they say. You wonder if hunger is the fastest route to worth. Some women go mad from isolation. Others just get good at hiding their intelligence. You learn quickly which aunt to ask for herbs and which one will call the priest if you mention a nightmare. One cousin disappears at 15, sent to serve in a noble house. That's the euphemism. No one explains it, but you watch the adult's eyes flicker like candlelight, and you know something was exchanged. Your first bleeding is private, until it's not. Your mother notices the stains. The washing ritual that follows is slow, careful, and silent. The look in her eyes is ancient, like she's remembering every bad ending she ever heard and hoping yours won't be one. She tells you not to mention it, not to complain, not to make jokes about cramps even to your sisters. God is watching. More importantly, the neighbors are. They say Eve caused the fall of man. You wonder how one bite of fruit got so expensive. You've never seen an apple, only turnips and dark bread, but you already know what original sin tastes like, metallic and monthly. Evenings are for prayers. You kneel, not always understanding the Latin, but the fear translates just fine. Your body is temptation, Your voice is dangerous. Your laughter can summon shame. A wandering friar once visits your village. He preaches in the square, beard tangled like moss. A woman's tongue, he says, is the whip that wounds the soul. People nod. Someone spits near your feet, not at you, just close enough to count. Later, your older brother repeats the sermon while elbowing you for hogging the stew. You laugh. He slaps the back of your head. See, he says, mock proud. Corrected her sin with a touch. There are stories, half whispers about other women. A widow who speaks too freely and is called unnatural. A girl who births a baby in secret and is found in the river, her wrists bound in silence. No one speaks their names. They just say, don't be like her. Quirky tidbit for tonight: in parts of medieval Germany, women could be publicly fined for speaking too loudly at market. Literal coins for each unsolicited opinion. It's the original shut up and take my money, but in reverse. You dream sometimes of running. Not from anyone in particular, just the weight. But even your dreams feel watched. There's a prayer stitched into your pillow. You're not sure who put it there. When you're about 10, your body starts shifting in ways you don't control. A traveling merchant glances at you a second too long. Your mother changes your clothes to a thicker wool. No more light linen. No more playing by the stream without stockings. She doesn't explain. She doesn't need to. You find yourself apologizing more. For existing in the doorway. For breathing wrong during supper. For having thoughts you don't say out loud, but that you're sure someone can hear anyway. There's a woman in the village called Mad Sibby. She talks to birds and smells of thyme and burnt hair. The children tease her. The adults nod politely but never invite her in. She's unmarried. Too free. That's the most dangerous thing of all. You pass her once in the woods. She looks at you like she sees all the years ahead of you, lined up like a crooked procession. She says, "Don't let them carve your mouth shut." You smile, confused. That night you dream of stitching and wax seals. Still, you adapt. You survive. You learn that silence is armor, that your gaze is currency, that everything about you, voice, hips, hands, belongs first to the rules and only second to yourself. And so you step into girlhood not as a season of bloom, but as a corridor narrowing with every step. You carry a basket, a prayer, and a question no one dares answer. What would happen if you were ever truly seen? You're barely old enough to plait your own hair when it happens. They carry you down the aisle, not in silk or flowers, but in the scratchy embrace of everyday wool. A priest waits, draped in faded linen and incense smoke. Today isn't a wedding, it's your baptism. The water's cold, but the air is colder. Not the temperature, the gaze. Everyone is watching. Everyone knows what this moment means, even if you don't. You're being claimed. The priest marks your forehead with the sign of the cross. You don't yet understand what a brand is, but your body already does. That cross is the first of many invisible chains. There's a brief cheer. Bread is broken. A distant cousin offers your mother a jar of goat butter and mutters, "May she be obedient." Everyone chuckles like it's just a phrase, but it's not. It's a hope, a warning, and a plan. The church begins its quiet takeover here, not with swords or sermons, but with water and whispers. You're told God sees you, all the time, even when you sleep, especially then. It's not exactly comforting. Historians still argue whether the early medieval church intended this constant surveillance metaphorically, or if people genuinely lived in a state of spiritual paranoia. Evidence suggests both. Your education begins, if you're lucky, with a handful of psalms and the Lord's Prayer. If you're really lucky, you get to learn your own name in Latin. That's usually where it stops. They teach you that your soul is inherently flawed, not broken, just dented by default. It's not because of anything you did, of course. It's because of the woman who came before you. Eve, the ultimate scapegoat in fig leaves. The church's story goes like this: man was made in God's image. Woman was made from the man. She listened to the snake. She fell. And so did everyone else. All of humanity yanked down by one curious bite. Guess who gets the bill you do? Every woman after her. Every daughter born into blood and ash and sighs. Every girl reminded weekly, sometimes daily, that her body is a vessel of sin. By the time you can read a single sentence, you've internalized it. Your existence is a test. Your silence is a virtue. Your obedience is a form of worship. Deviate and the consequences aren't just social, they're eternal. But hey, silver lining. You might become a saint. You just have to endure starvation, isolation, lifelong virginity, and ideally a painful death. Easy. Some families hedge their bets by offering daughters to convents, not because they're holy, because it's cheaper than a dowry. And besides, a nun in the family means God owes you a favor, right? But you're not a nun. You're at home learning the Lord's Prayer while scrubbing yesterday's stew off rough wooden bowls. Religion isn't separate from your life. It is your life. Every rule, every habit, every silence is steeped in it. There are paintings of Mary in your chapel, always weeping, always clean. She is the impossible standard virgin and mother. Somehow both, somehow neither. You are told to be like her. You wonder how. Your mother has a bruised lip one morning and says she fell on the root cellar steps. You don't ask. You already know the script. He provides. She obeys. The church nods. You learn about penance early. Not from doing anything wrong, but because it's routine. A kind of spiritual hygiene. You confess thoughts you didn't even finish thinking. You apologize for existing too loudly. The priest listens. Sometimes he scolds. Sometimes he smiles. You don't like either. There's a fringe belief floating around the countryside, almost folklore, that baptizing a girl too early can make her spirit too submissive. That the water seeps into her bones and makes her spine soft. Church elders scoff at this, of course, but they also make sure to baptize girls as quickly as possible. Coincidence, you meet Sister Iveta once. She visits from the nunnery 2 valleys over. Her eyes are kind. She doesn't walk. She glides like a woman who's made peace with vanishing. You admire her. Then she opens her mouth and says, "Obedience is the highest freedom." You blink. You nod. But something in you sours. Your father sharpens his belt next to the hearth one evening. It's not a threat. It's routine. Maintenance. Like oiling a tool. You help him. You hand him the cloth. You say nothing. Years later, you'll still feel that buckle in your thoughts. Mainstream historical fact. The medieval church officially endorsed corporal punishment for disobedient wives and daughters, as long as it was measured. They even provided guidance on how to avoid bruising the face. After all, dignity matters. There's a book your brother's allowed to read, De Mulieribus Claris. It's about famous women. You sneak a peek and learn quickly to be famous, and female in the Middle Ages, you must be martyred, married to power, or maligned. No one wants to be the third. Everyone becomes it anyway. Your world is structured like a church, narrow at the top, full of voices at the bottom that never get heard. Men are closer to heaven. Women echo in the rafters, unseen and unlit. During Lent, you fast. Not out of choice, but devotion. Hunger becomes holy. You wonder if God likes your stomach to growl. Maybe that's the sound of prayer. There's a girl in the next village who stops speaking. Not a vow, just something in her breaks. They call it a blessing. The Holy Spirit has claimed her voice, they say. But you've seen her eyes. It's not holy. It's something else. Something sad. She becomes legend. Parents point at her like a warning. See how good she is. See how quiet you're taught to pray in whispers. Not because God prefers quiet, but because too much noise from a woman is suspicious. Desire, anger, even joy, those are loud. And loud is dangerous. A joke floats around the fields during harvest. If a woman speaks and no man hears it, is it still a sin? The older boys laugh. You try to. It doesn't quite land. You hear a story from an old tanner. Once a woman spoke during a sermon. Just cleared her throat, really. The priest stopped, declared her overcome by the devil, and made her kneel in ashes until vespers. No one helped her. No one wanted to be next. And so you learn the final rule that baptism didn't teach survival means silence. Not just with your voice, but your face, your body, your needs. Every time you dip your fingers in holy water, you remember. Not just the ceremony, but the promise you never made yet must always be good. Be quiet. Be less. Your body isn't yours. Not really. By the time you're 12, it's already been categorized, cautioned against, and if you're honest, confessed about. You start to understand it, the way one might understand a cursed object in a dusty church, reliquary, sacred, yes, but mostly dangerous. The women around you speak in hints and hedges. Protect your modesty, says one. Temptation hides in the idle curve, says another, while pinching your sleeve to ensure it covers your wrist. You aren't sure what counts as idle or curved, but you quickly learn that curiosity earns a slap, or worse, pity. Because now you're becoming. That's the word they use. You're not sure what it means. But when the boys glance too long, and the priest looks away faster than usual, you sense its weight. A girl becoming is a problem waiting to happen. The church has terms for you now, not affectionate ones. Vessel of sin, daughter of Eve, weaker vessel. You're a walking warning sign in a skirt, one misplaced breath away from spiritual catastrophe. You're told that a woman's womb is a seat of wildness, that it can wander, literally. Hysteria, they call it, a medical term that comes from hystera, the Greek for uterus. Ancient physicians claimed the womb could move around inside you like a possessed animal causing madness. And the cure, marriage, childbearing, domestic stillness. Mainstream historical fact, this idea of the wandering womb persisted well into the Renaissance. The church didn't invent it, but it certainly didn't object. A domesticated uterus was a manageable woman. You feel it in how people talk around you. Your moods are divine puzzles, your laughter suspect. You cry too easily, that's Eve. You don't cry at all, that's probably witchcraft. Historians still argue whether the church truly believed these body theologies or simply used them to enforce order. But the result is the same. Your body becomes not a temple, but a battleground. There's a painting in the chapel, a fresco half flaking off with age. It shows a woman with long hair falling in shame before a golden-robed saint. Her body is twisted with guilt. Her sin unspoken is obvious. She was too much, too seen, too soft. You stare at it too long and get scolded. At home, you see it in subtler ways. Your mother folds your shift with a sigh. Your aunt whispers something about keeping your knees together while sitting. A neighbor offers to pray for your growing soul, and her eyes drop below your chin as she says it. Every message is indirect. Every warning laced with metaphor. But the point is clear, sin starts in the skin. You begin to notice the power your body holds, and how little of that power belongs to you. One afternoon, you catch the miller's apprentice looking at you, mouth slightly open, like he's seen something miraculous or forbidden. You feel a spark of something, and then a bolt of shame that follows fast and hard. You run. You confess. You fast for a day just to be safe. You're not sure what you did wrong, only that you probably did. The church offers a model for womanhood, but she's impossible. The Virgin Mary, Mother of God. She gave birth without pleasure, without sin, without stain. You, on the other hand, are told your body is always halfway to betrayal. So you try. You fold your hands in church. You bite your tongue when boys joke about farm animals and priests pretend not to hear. You lower your eyes when someone mentions a childbirth gone wrong. Because if sin begins in you, salvation must come from silence. Then there's the issue of smell. Yes, smell. It's a quiet obsession in your world. A woman who smells too sweet is suspicious. A woman who smells too strong of sweat, blood herbs is worse. You learn to mask yourself with lavender sachets, rosemary sprigs tucked in underarm seams. One girl uses crushed violet petals in her shoes and gets called a temptress for weeks. Quirky fringe tidbits, some religious texts, warned women that their monthly blood could attract demons or poison crops. One even claimed it could rust metal. You're not sure what kind of blood they were dealing with, but you never touch your father's tools again. You start to shrink. Not physically, but in posture, presence, pace. You move quieter. You laugh smaller. You learn to pass through doorways like a prayer, hoping no one notices, but some always do. You overhear two older women talking near the well. One says she's coming into her sins. The other tuts and nods. They're talking about a girl not much older than you, maybe 14. What she did, no one says. What she was is enough. You begin to understand sin isn't always something you do. Sometimes it's something you are. And so you adjust. You try to make your body invisible without making it strange. That's a hard balance. Too covered and you're mocked as frigid. Too loose with your laces and someone will whisper, fallen. Every step is choreography. Your dreams begin to betray you, not nightmares exactly, but vivid ones. You dream of dancing in moonlight with someone whose face is always changing. You wake up flushed and terrified. You pray. You fast. You dream again. One day during Mass, you dare to think, what if this guilt doesn't belong to me? But that thought is a danger. You bury it like a relic no one should find. The bishop visits once a year. He wears gold thread and speaks of purity. His ring smells of vinegar and beeswax. You kiss it. You try not to think about how he once brushed your shoulder and didn't move away fast enough. The rules are everywhere. In the way you're expected to sit. In how you cross your legs, if at all. In how you lower your voice to a pleasing hush when a man enters the room. You remember Sister Iveta again, her eyes glazed with practiced serenity. You wonder if she once questioned her body too, and if so, when she stopped. The truth is, everyone wants your body to behave, but no one teaches you how to live in it. You are both accused and ignored. A boy gets caught behind the stable with a girl. He's scolded, then sent off to apprentice somewhere. She's sent away entirely. Later, someone claims she died of a fever. The adults nod with the kind of quiet that means she didn't. So you grow careful. You watch your reflection in the river, not with vanity, but calculation. Where's the sin today? In your collarbone, in your gaze, in the way you tilted your head without realizing you try to become less visible. But invisibility, you learn, is also suspicious. There's no winning here, just surviving. And you do. Because what else is there? You say your prayers, you do your chores, And every time someone looks at you for a second too long, you whisper a Hail Mary, not for forgiveness, but as armor. Because in the end, the church taught you this: your body is your cross, and you will carry it in silence every day until someone else decides it's done. You're 13, maybe 14. No one keeps exact count unless it's tied to land inheritance or scandal, and suddenly the word virgin clings to you like damp wool. It's not just a label. It's currency, identity, protection. A kind of social insurance policy that might keep you from being bartered away too soon, or at least not to the wrong person. And yet here's the strange part: you're expected to remain a virgin, but never talk about what that means. You're told to defend something no one explains, protect a boundary you've never seen, and fear a line that's drawn in disappearing ink. You don't even understand the anatomy of it. The hymen is whispered about like a sacred seal, something you either lose or break, depending on who's telling the story. It's a mythical little gate between girlhood and disgrace, supposedly evidence of your purity, unless you ride horses, climb trees, or heaven forbid laugh too loud. Mainstream historical fact by the High Middle Ages. Virginity tests were sometimes performed on noble brides. Midwives were called in to verify the bride's intactness, usually by finger inspection. Science, number, ritual, theater, absolutely. You hear about one such test in a nearby village. A girl barely 16 married to a squire with more land than wit. On her wedding night, the sheets are hung out the window for all to see. They're white and dry. Her mother weeps. Her aunt faints. The priest is called to council. 3 weeks later, she's returned to her father's house unwifeable, unwomaned. You shiver. You don't even like the word blood in your mouth anymore. The Virgin Mary looms larger than ever. Every sermon, every song, every fresco praises her for being the holy contradiction mother yet untouched, fertile yet flawless. She's the church's ideal woman, quiet, kind, and inconveniently supernatural. You're none of those things, so you learn to walk carefully, speak softly, laugh in a way that could be mistaken for a cough. When men speak of women, they talk about purity like it's a fruit, once bitten, gone forever. You're not sure where that leaves you if you were never the gardener in the first place. There's a girl in the next village whose nickname is Crimson. You never learn her real name, just that she wore red once too young to know better. They say she invited the devil. She still walks upright, but her shadow clings tighter than most. Fringe tidbit for tonight: in certain parts of medieval Spain and southern France, midwives and wise women practiced a kind of symbolic virginity restoration for brides who had lost their hymen, whether by accident or otherwise. Chicken blood was sometimes used. It didn't fool everyone, but it often fooled enough. The idea that purity could be faked enrages some men. Others care more about the show than the substance. Either way, you learn quickly that your worth is tied to blood you didn't ask to shed. Even jokes about this can ruin a girl. You once overheard a young man say, "Better a stone than a wife who's known the bed." His friends laughed. You didn't. You weren't supposed to hear it, but you remember it anyway. Your own mother tells you strange stories now. Parables more than memories. One about a girl who touched a man's hand and died childless. Another about a bride who bled properly and earned sainthood. There's no middle ground. You try not to think too hard about the day you'll be married. It hovers like weather, inevitable, ominous. Some girls look forward to it, mostly the ones who believe the romance songs sung by toothless minstrels in the square. You know better. The songs leave out the part where love gets arranged over ale and livestock negotiations. One evening, your father mutters about a neighboring farm boy. Strong back, he says. Decent teeth. Your stomach knots. You're not ready. But readiness is never part of the deal. A local noblewoman is getting married, and the whole village buzzes about her dowryland jewelry, a bed carved from Italian wood. No one mentions the girl herself, just her assets, like a particularly valuable sheep. You help sew her wedding gown, a fine linen thing edged with pearls. As your fingers work the stitches, you wonder what's being sewn into your own future. What threads are being pulled, which seams are already unraveling. Historians still argue whether women in the Middle Ages believed in the idea of sexual sin or simply internalized it to survive. Some personal letters from the period suggest inner conflict. Others drip with piety. The line between belief and performance thin as lace. A traveling friar visits your village and warns the crowd that a single impure touch can stain a soul forever. You glance at your hands. They look the same as yesterday, but you suddenly feel marked. You've been warned about the gaze. A man looking too long, a woman returning the look. Your aunt once said, "A look can be louder than a scream." You try to forget that. You can't. Even the church's own relics obsess over virginity. Skulls of saints labeled pure. Bones kept in gold boxes with inscriptions like intacta. You wonder if anyone would care about your bones. You start to think of your body like a castle under siege. Every glance a battering ram. Every whispered compliment a crack in the stone. You wonder what happens after the walls fall. Girls who fall disappear in stories. Some are sent to nunneries. Others die of fevers that no one names. A few remain shunned and silent ghosts while still breathing. But there are exceptions. Rare ones. A baker's daughter once ran away with a knight, yes, truly. They say she wore men's clothes and rode astride, not side saddle. They say she wasn't caught. You want to believe it. You need to. Sometimes in the dark, you wonder what would happen if you threw off all the rules. If you ran barefoot through the fields and screamed your own name. Would the world shatter? Or would it pretend not to hear, but you know the answer? You always have. So you stay. You comply. You keep the veil low and the silence deep. You repeat the rules in your head like rosary beads. Be quiet. Be still. Be clean. Don't touch. Don't smile. Don't tempt. Guard your threshold. Guard your blood. Guard your breath. Because in this world, virginity isn't just a state, it's a sentence. A burden you carry until it's taken, sold, or stolen. And even then, you're the one who must atone. You've heard the stories whispered and wobbly told by old women with more opinions than teeth. Somewhere they say there are girls locked in iron belts, literally locked key, dangling from a husband's hip or a crusader's saddlebag. It's supposed to keep them faithful, or pure, or just out of trouble. But you've never seen one. No one you know has. You do know of Margreta the candlemaker's niece, who returned from a noble household limping and sour-faced. When someone made a snide joke about her missing key, she spit in his ale. That's about as close as you've come to a chastity belt. Historians still argue whether chastity belts were ever actually used, or just a lurid symbol of male anxiety. A few rusted examples sit in dusty museums, but many are likely Renaissance hoaxes, exaggerated drawings, or devices for public shame, not actual daily wear. Still, the myth persists, like the dragon under the bed of female freedom. Because whether or not the belt existed, the idea did, and that's what matters here. Your purity doesn't need steel. The real locks are subtler rules, rituals, expectations, invisible chains that don't rattle but burn all the same. You don't climb trees anymore. You don't race barefoot through fields, not since the incident with Ellen, who tripped over her skirt in front of the visiting priest and got called loose of foot and nature. You didn't realize gravity was a moral failing. You feel the pressure wrap tighter with every moon. You are being watched, but not out of love. You are being measured. One girl in your village gets married at 15. Her dowry includes 3 chickens, a patch of cabbage land, and a silver crucifix. On her wedding day, she looks like a scared child in too much lace. That's because she is. You hear whispers about whether she was untouched. Not by her husband, he'll find out soon enough, but by the rest of the world. Fringe tidbit. Some communities believed a husband could annul a marriage if he suspected his bride had prior knowledge, meaning not just sexual experience, but even romantic imagination. Thought crime in bloom. You do your best not to imagine anything, but it's hard. There are songs you're not supposed to sing, old ballads about women who run away with outlaws or sailors. One has a line about a belt breaking at midnight, and the moon did smile. You hum it under your breath sometimes while scrubbing laundry, then feel guilty for 3 days. You hear one man boast that his bride was so untouched, she flinched like a deer at the wedding bed. His friends laugh. He sounds proud. You don't understand why. Because what they want is a paradox innocence mixed with performance. You must be pure, yet perfectly ready. Naive, yet accommodating. A blank page that already knows how to read itself. It's madness. But no one questions it aloud. Instead, you listen to cautionary tales. One about a girl who bathed in the river alone, scandalous. One about a wife who laughed too loudly at a feast and was returned within a month. One about a merchant's daughter who read a poem about desire and was accused of witchcraft. That part of the story ends with fire. You start to see your own body like something you're just renting a house built to host shame and avoid scandal. Even your hips feel like loaded dice rolling you closer to suspicion every year. One Sunday during Mass, the priest preaches on the armor of virtue. He says a woman's silence is her sword and her modesty her shield. You look around. No one laughs. No one breathes too deeply. You imagine your own armor, but it's made of fabric and fear. And still they claim it protects you. There's a baker's wife who walks with her chin up. 2 up. People say she must have sinned and survived it. The phrase is almost admiration almost. Mostly it's envy. You wonder if that's the real danger, not losing your virtue, but surviving it and being unchanged. Mainstream fact, while chastity belts remain dubious, symbolic punishments for female impropriety were very real. In some areas, women were forced to wear iron masks with spiked gags designed not to prevent lust, but to silence it. You hear of one such woman paraded through a nearby town square for excessive opinion. The phrase sticks with you like a fishbone in the throat. You wonder what she said. You wonder if it was worth it. At night, you dream of keys, not the chastity kind, but ones that open other things, gates, books, windows. You hide these dreams behind silent prayers. You don't want to be caught wanting more. Even the concept of more feels dangerous now. You watch as your world shrinks again. Girls who used to run beside you now walk with heads bowed. One gets betrothed to a man twice her age, another sent to a nunnery for her own good. You don't know what her good looked like before. You're not sure she did either. You find a broken comb near the well and keep it. It's nothing really, a snapped piece of bone smooth along one edge. But it feels like a relic of something soft, something yours. Sometimes you whisper to it, not prayers, just thoughts. It's the only thing that doesn't listen with judgment. You pass a boy on the path who grins and says, "Still got your key." It's supposed to be funny. You laugh because that's what girls do when they're afraid. Later alone, you clutch your belly and imagine a belt made not of iron but of stories, of looks, of rules, sharpened into silence. You imagine throwing it into the river and letting the moon laugh again. But you don't. Because the joke's on you. There's no real belt. There never was. The lock has always been in the mind. And the key. Well, the key was handed to everyone but you. They say it's a blessing, a calling, a holy escape. You enter the convent gates with your hair braided low and your hands still smelling of hearth smoke. No one asks if you wanted this life. Wanting is not the point. You are now a bride of Christ. Congratulations. The bells toll for you. The convent is quiet, but not silent. The wind presses against the stone walls like an old friend, and the nuns move in pairs, whispering like waves against a chapel's edge. You're given a new name, something soft and saintly, and a coarse linen robe that smells faintly of vinegar and beeswax. Inside, it's a strange world, neither entirely free nor entirely imprisoned. Convents, like most things in the Middle Ages, are double-edged. For some, they're the only place a woman might learn to read. For others, they're just a fancier cage one with hymns instead of housework. The first morning you wake before dawn to pray. Matins. Then again for lauds. Then again. The hours march on each one a rung in a holy ladder you're expected to climb. By breakfast, you've already atoned for thoughts you haven't had yet. Historians still argue whether convent life empowered medieval women or merely reframed their silence in prettier language. The truth, as usual, lives somewhere in the dust between both ideas. Here, your body is supposed to become invisible. You're told it's no longer relevant. You belong to heaven now, and heaven doesn't care about hips or hairlines. But reality is less polite. Because behind these walls, women are still women. One nun has a laugh that snorts out sideways like a goat trying to cough. Another collects apple seeds under her pillow for luck. Sister Imelda sings in her sleep. And the abbess, she walks with a cane carved from what used to be a bishop's walking stick. No one asks how she got it. This place isn't sterile. It breathes. There's no firewood some mornings, so you huddle in the cloister with your fingers under your arms. You write prayers with numb hands and squint at fading ink by candlelight. When the weather turns, the wind howls through the chapel windows like a psalm sung backward. And the silence. It's not what you expect. It isn't peace, it's management. A quiet maintained like a garden hedge, always trimmed, never wild. You're told that speaking too much invites the devil, that joy should be tempered, that laughter in excess is suspect. One girl, Sister Thomasina, gets reassigned to the infirmary after someone hears her giggle in the refectory. No one says why, you just see her less, and her laughter fades into something else, a mutter, a scrape of spoons. Quirky tidbit for you, some nunneries kept parrots. Actual parrots. Gifted by noble patrons or sea traders, they were prized for mimicry. There are accounts of birds reciting psalms or mocking abbesses. One was even rumored to say, "More wine, sister," which led to a week-long investigation and no more parrots. You discover the library. It's locked. But the key is kept on a ring the size of your fist, worn by the archivist. A short woman with no patience and a nose like a question mark. She lets you in once when she's in a generous mood, and you see texts in Latin, Greek, even Arabic. You inhale the parchment like a starving animal. You want more, but wanting is still not the point. You ask the abbess for reading privileges. She grants them after 3 months, provided you copy texts, not just read them. Your fingers cramp. Your eyes blur. You copy anyway. Some of the texts are saints' lives. Women who bled for God, starved for Him, melted into divine visions. They walk barefoot over thorns and cry tears that heal the sick. Their beauty is described in painful detail, lips like rosebuds, skin like milk. You wonder why holiness always sounds like courtship. Mainstream historical fact. Hagiographies, saints' biographies, were often written by men who emphasized physical beauty and bodily suffering. The more gruesome the martyrdom, the purer the saint. You try to believe the stories, you really do. But sometimes Sister Adelina tells other stories. Late at night after Compline, she whispers tales in the dark. Stories of nuns who ran away, one who disguised herself as a monk and joined a pilgrimage, another who had a child in secret and buried it under the herb garden. You don't ask if they're true. Truth here is less important than survival. One day you find a scrap of parchment under your straw mattress. Someone's hand copied a love poem, not to God, to her. The lines are uneven but beautiful. Your shadow is where my soul sleeps, it says. You read it 5 times before burning it. But you don't forget. Because behind these walls, women still want, still feel, still ache. And sometimes they find ways to smuggle softness into the rules. A stolen plum tucked under a veil. A hand lingered too long during embroidery. A hymn hummed a little slower than allowed. You watch the abbess closely. She keeps the rules, yes, but she also bends them. She grants mercy with sharp eyes. She knows what to punish and what to ignore. She's a woman who climbed a crooked ladder and built herself a throne at the top. You admire her. You fear her. You wonder if she remembers wanting things once, too. Sometimes you imagine what your life would have been without the convent. Would you be married now, swollen with child dead from childbirth like so many others? Or would you be laughing in the market loud enough to be excommunicated? You don't know. But here at least you get books. The bells toll again. Sext. Time to pray. You rise your knees sore from hours on cold stone, and you join the procession of veiled heads and folded hands. Outside, a raven caws from the chapel roof. You pretend it's laughing. You envy it. Because it can fly. You learn early that your body is an advertisement, whether you like it or not. And not for beauty exactly, or health, or even marriageability. No, your body advertises your morality. Your sleeves, your hair, your gait, these things speak louder than any words you might dare utter. You are not supposed to be fashionable. That's vanity. But you are supposed to be neat. That's virtue. You shouldn't call attention to your body. But you also shouldn't seem disheveled, or you'll be mistaken for a harlot, or worse, a peasant. It's a tightrope with no net. You walk it daily. Hair, especially, is dangerous. A woman's hair is said to be her glory, so glorious, in fact, that it must be hidden immediately. If it's too long and unbound, it might invite lust. If it's cut short, it might signal defiance or punishment. You remember the first time your mother braided your hair into a tight coil and pinned it beneath a linen cap. "You're not a child anymore," she said. You hadn't spoken. You didn't need to. That braid was your new confession. Mainstream historical fact: married women in medieval Europe were expected to cover their hair in public. Depending on the region, it might be with a veil, a wimple, or a long flowing barbette beneath a coif. Only loose-haired maidens or widows in mourning wore their hair uncovered. And unmarried, well, your hair was your resume. Your friend Alice had red curls she could never quite tame. Her veil always looked like it had lost an argument with the wind. The priest said she was immodest by nature. It didn't matter that she read psalms with more devotion than anyone else. Her hair did all the talking. You tried once to wear a softer veil, one with tiny blue stitching along the hem. Nothing fancy, just lovely. A gift from your aunt. By sunset, 3 women had commented 2 men had stared too long, and your father had ordered you to remove it. "You want attention," he snapped. then live with what it brings. You folded it quietly. You haven't worn it since. There's a girl in the market who wears her veil too low, her eyes always half covered. She walks like she's trying to disappear. One day, a group of boys call her Holy Ghost. She doesn't flinch. The rumor is she's hiding a bruise, or a lover. No one agrees which. Historians still argue whether the veil was originally a symbol of humility or ownership. In many cases, both interpretations existed side by side. Women internalized the meaning differently, depending on what they could afford to believe. Then there's the matter of clothing. Sumptuary laws tell you what fabric you're allowed to wear, based not just on class, but on gender, marital status, and even sexual conduct. Silk, forget it. Velvet. That's for duchesses or women accused of lechery. There's no in-between. Fringe tidbit: in some regions of Italy, women found guilty of adultery were forced to wear striped clothing in public for a month, the same pattern worn by executioners and criminals. Nothing says penance like matching your local hangman. You stick to wool, homespun, scratchy but righteous. The rules are endless. Necklines must not dip too low. Belts must not sit too high. Even the colors you wear carry judgment. Red too bold, green fertility. White good, but not forever spilled stew stains too easily, and then people talk. One day, your mother stitches an extra panel into your tunic. Your body has changed. She says nothing, but her mouth is tight the whole time. You feel the message in the thread: we'll hide it. We'll try. Because to grow is to sin, at least in the eyes of a town always squinting at the curvature of girls. Even the way you walk becomes performance. Too fast, you're unruly. Too slow, you're drawing attention. You settle on something awkward and shuffle-shaped, the kind of gait that suggests purpose but never pride. You envy the boys who run, who swing from trees, who jump in puddles and leave muddy footprints in chapel aisles. You try it once and are told a girl who runs doesn't know her place. You weren't even running. You were chasing a goat. You don't argue, you never argue. And then there's perfume. Not the kind you'd imagine floral and delicate. No, in your village it's rosemary boiled in vinegar or rose petals crushed with pig lard. You apply just enough under your collar to keep the sweat from smelling sinful. Because yes, even your scent must conform. One girl once wore too much clove oil. The priest said she smelled like temptation. The baker's son agreed loudly, and she was sent to her aunt's farm until she remembered how to be modest. You remember. You always remember. The worst part is that some of the rules contradict each other. You must cover your skin, but not look frumpy. You must dress well enough to reflect family honor, but never so well that people notice. You must appear youthful, but not inviting. A ghost of a girl. Present, but unapproachable. You study older women to learn the art. One widow wears layers so thick you can barely see her shape. Her eyes, however, are sharp. She catches glances before they land. You admire her. You want her invisibility. But there's another Mistress Yolande, who wears sleeves embroidered with gold thread. Her husband died under curious circumstances, and now she strolls the market like she owns the sky. People sneer, people stare, people copy her lace patterns in secret. You're not sure if you fear her or worship her. One night, while brushing your hair in secret, because even that's considered vain, after sundown, you whisper to yourself, who decides what's decent? The mirror, small and cracked, says nothing. But your reflection looks back like it's keeping secrets. Mainstream fashion manuals of the time said little to nothing about comfort. That wasn't the point. Clothing was armor, a statement of who you were, what you believed, and who you were not. You once caught sight of your reflection in a pond. Your veil crooked your tunic, damp your eyes, tired. And you thought, this is what obedience looks like. It wasn't ugly, just dimmed, like candlelight behind thick glass. You dream sometimes of dressing in foreign silks, of letting your hair down in the sun, of spinning so fast your hemline flutters and scandalizes an entire council. But you never do, because your body is not your own. It's a communal project, a neighborhood concern, a symbol in a sermon you didn't write. So you wake each morning and dress not for warmth or comfort, but for acceptability. You wrap your hair, you lower your hem, you pass inspection. And somewhere beneath the fabric, you're still there, waiting. You don't quite know when it starts, this strange performance where women become icons and love becomes literature, but you're never meant to speak. You see it first in the way the troubadour sings at the feast, lute trembling in his hands, eyes closed in manufactured anguish. He sings not to the woman across the room, but about her, like she's a dream pinned to the wall, too sacred to touch. This is courtly love, they tell you. Refined, elevated, pure. You watch as the knight bows to the lady, praises her pale hands and high forehead. She barely glances at him. That's the point. The less she responds, the more noble his longing becomes. You look at the lady's face. It says nothing. She is adored, but not addressed. Exalted, but not heard. This, you learn, is the new template. Be an inspiration, not a participant. Mainstream historical fact. Courtly love flourished in the 12th and 13th centuries, particularly in France and England. Rooted in chivalric ideals, it often involved a nobleman expressing adoration for a high-born, usually married lady. These relationships were literary more than physical, but their cultural impact shaped how real women were perceived. You're told that a lady's virtue is tested by how gracefully she denies affection. A smile can lead to scandal. A kiss, social collapse. Her power lies in restraint. Her value in being desired from afar. You try to mimic it. Practice distant glances. Curate the tilt of your head. Perfect the art of elegant avoidance. But it's exhausting. You're not a statue in a tapestry. You sweat, stumble, and think inconvenient thoughts. Historians still argue whether courtly love elevated women or just created a prettier cage. After all, when you're idealized, you're no longer a person. You're a mirror reflecting a man's longing. Your cousin Beatrice reads one of the poems aloud by the fire. It's about a knight who falls into despair because his lady won't even touch his hand. He dies of love, she giggles. You raise an eyebrow. Doubt he dies of that, you mutter. That earns a swat, but also a smirk. Still, the fantasy spreads. The lady in the tower, the knight in the woods. The chastity, the yearning, the endless poetry about eyes and sighs. And all of it without a single woman getting to say yes or no. You hear the lady of the manor once compare herself to the Virgin Mary, then immediately blush and confess to the chaplain. He tells her every good woman is a reflection of Mary in modesty, if not miracle. You wonder how modesty became a performance too. The troubadours sing about love so painful, it borders on spiritual. To burn for her, one says, is to be purified. You think that sounds like disease, not romance. Still, the women smile politely. They know better than to interrupt the illusion. Fringe tidbits, some manuals of courtly behavior advised women not to laugh in front of men, lest it shatter the poetry of affection. One guide even suggested women weep softly when complimented to show both humility and vulnerability. You try it once. You fail. The compliment made you snort. The boy looked horrified. You haven't seen him since. But beneath all the poems and practiced sorrows, a darker truth lingers. Because while love may be courtly, the consequences are not. A nobleman can pine, sigh, and sing, and then marry someone else guilt-free. A lady who slips, who falls in love the wrong way, she's exiled, disgraced, sometimes even veiled, and hidden in a convent like spoiled meat. You hear of a countess in the South who wrote her own love poetry, actual words, in her own hand. When her husband found out, he burned the pages. The second offense, he locked her in a stone tower for the rest of her life. No exaggeration. Her name was removed from the family genealogy. She still sings, they say, through cracks in the wall. You wonder what her voice sounds like. In the village, there's less poetry and more whisper, but the ideals trickle down. A girl once drew a heart in the dirt with her foot and was slapped by her mother for inviting lust with such symbols. Courtly becomes code for anything slightly warm but not quite dangerous. You're expected to be alluring but unapproachable, like a warm loaf of bread behind glass. You start to see the absurdity. You begin to notice how often women are expected to bear the weight of other people's imaginations. The moment you smile kindly at a stranger, he decides he's in love. Not with you, but the idea of you. And now you're responsible for keeping his fantasy intact. Don't speak too plainly. Don't correct him. Let the illusion bloom, then let it fade. Gently. A widow named Isabeau once told you, "The second time a man loves you, it's for who he thinks you used to be." You didn't understand then. You do now. Even in the songs, women don't get to finish the thought. Their lines are always last if they speak at all. Mainstream courtly tales feature women with names like Isolde, Elaine, Eneide. Their beauty is mythic, their pain poetic, their speech sparse. You start writing your own verses in the margins of a psalter, not love poems, observations. One reads, "He loves the moon but curses the night. He calls her cold when she does not burn." You hide it under your straw mattress. Sometimes when the house is quiet, you recite them in your head and pretend someone's listening. Not to fall in love with you, just to hear you. Because courtly love isn't love. It's longing rehearsed in a mirror. It's desire kept just far enough away to be harmless and therefore permitted. But you are not harmless. You feel too much. You think too loud. And you've never once wanted to be a statue, so you smile when they sing. You nod politely when the next poem starts. And all the while you dream not of roses or lute strings, but of real voices. Voices that don't whisper about you, like you're a distant star. Voices that ask, "What do you want?" And maybe someday you'll answer. Marriage is your reward, also your burden, also your prison. It depends on who's talking and what they want from you. You've been hearing about it since you could walk. Marriage as salvation, as duty, as a woman's highest calling. A good husband is a staircase to heaven. The village midwife once said, then muttered something into her ale that sounded suspiciously like, "Unless he falls down it." There's no such thing as dating, no getting to know you. There's a handshake, a dowry, and a ceremony. Sometimes there's a smile, sometimes not. You are offered like a promise, accepted, like a purchase, and wrapped in linen, like you're being gently shipped to someone else's future. Mainstream historical fact. For most of the Middle Ages, especially among the lower and middle classes, marriages were arranged by families, often when girls were in their early to mid-teens. Consent was technically required by church law, but in practice that consent was a formality often assumed or pressured. Your mother cries, but not the way you expect. Not from joy, not from loss. It's more like a slow release, like she's been holding her breath for 15 years and finally lets it out. You don't cry. Not yet. The wedding is small. A priest, some neighbors, a bit of stale bread, and the official blessing of God. Your name is spoken once, twice, then rarely again. From now on, you'll mostly be wife of. Your own story is spliced into someone else's scroll. He's older, of course. His teeth are fine. His hands are rough. He smells of barley and wet leather. He doesn't look cruel, but then you've learned that cruelty can wear many masks, sometimes even kindness. The wedding night is not a mystery. It's just something you survive. No one gives you instructions, not really. Just warnings. Lie still. Think of the saints. Don't cry too loud. One older cousin whispered, "Pretend your soul has gone visiting." You try it. It almost works. Historians still argue whether medieval women viewed marital sex as duty or despair, or some strange mixture of both. Church law allowed for intimacy, but only within strict boundaries, for procreation, not pleasure. Anything else was sin, even between spouses. You learn to count the days of your cycle like soldiers. Not to avoid children, that's not up to you. Just to prepare emotionally, spiritually, sometimes physically. Because what happens in that bed isn't always kind, or brief, or survivable without scars. There are rules. You're not allowed to enjoy it. Not too much anyway. That would make you immodest or worse experienced. You hear from the priest that each unholy thought during union adds a sin to your soul. You begin to wonder how many you've racked up by just wishing it would end faster. Fringe tidbit: one medieval penitential manual listed specific penances for sexual acts, even within marriage. A husband who kissed his wife immoderately might be told to fast for 3 days. A wife who initiated intimacy, 7. You joke about this once to yourself. 7 days for wanting. That's one for every word I'm not allowed to say. You don't laugh. In public, you hold your husband's arm when needed. You serve him stew. You kiss his cheek on feast days. You nod when he speaks. You keep his house orderly, his clothing patched, his mood soothed. You become a symbol of stability. Not because you feel stable, but because your instability is inconvenient. There's a woman down the road, Joan, who stopped speaking after her 3rd child died. Her husband says she's possessed. The priest says she's grieving improperly. The midwife says nothing but leaves extra herbs by her door. You visit Joan once. Her eyes are clear. She speaks 3 words: "They made me." You know exactly what she means. You learn to time things. When to ask for salt. When to leave the room. When to go still so completely that he thinks you're asleep. It's a kind of choreography. You dance it nightly. He's not cruel, not exactly. But he never asks if you're okay. No one does. Sometimes he's tender, but only if you're quiet. Passion makes him suspicious. If you kiss his neck, he pulls away. If you shudder, he frowns. Wife, we are not beasts. But you never said you were. You begin to realize that even in marriage, your body isn't yours. It's borrowed, accessed, a place where someone else lives and leaves. You once hear a priest say, "A woman's body is like a field. Her husband may sow when he pleases." You feel something shrivel inside you at that. Not because it's shocking, but because it isn't. The village women talk in code. How's the harvest, one might ask. Weather's dry, another answers. You learn to hear the pain tucked beneath their laughter. You become fluent in the language of endured things. There's a widow who lives alone on the edge of town. They call her Witch Agatha. You suspect that's just code for woman who stopped pretending. She keeps bees, bakes bread with herbs you've never tasted, and lets her hair grow wild. You want to ask her something, anything. But every time you near her cottage, someone stops you. She's dangerous. She talks to herself. She lets her cat inside. You want to scream. so you hum. You hum when you clean. You hum when you bleed. You hum when he's on top of you, breath hot and fast and done before you even finish counting. And then you smile at breakfast. Because a wife who frowns is a wife who invites questions. And questions lead to places even worse than answers. Mainstream historical fact, marital rape, was not considered a crime in medieval Europe. A husband's access to his wife's body was legally and religiously sanctioned, often framed as his right and her responsibility. You look at your hands. They've changed. They're not smaller, not larger, but harder. Like bark over a sapling. Your body is aging faster than your face. Sometimes you wonder if there's any part of you that didn't belong to someone else first. Your mother, your priest, your husband, your parish, your God. You decide to keep one thing: your thoughts, not the ones they trained you to have, the real ones, the ones that arrive like sparks under your ribs at night. Sometimes they're memories of simpler things. Sometimes they're just dreams, like building a house where no one knocks, or breathing without praying, or sitting beside someone who listens and never judges your silence. You keep those tucked under your tongue like a secret wafer, because if your body must be borrowed, at least your mind can stay yours. He dies on a Wednesday, just before supper. The light is thin, the stew is thick, and someone calls your name from the doorway with a voice so soft it already knows the answer. You don't cry, not at first. Instead, you peel off your apron, walk to the room where he lies stiff and cooling, and place your hand on his chest. The silence there is shocking, like walking into a church after the bells have stopped. You think he's really gone. And then you think, what now? Because being a wife was a role, a costume you were never allowed to remove. And now it's lying at your feet, half burned. What comes after the ashes? Widowhood. You're a widow now, a word that tastes like mothballs and unbreathed air. Mainstream historical fact. Widows in medieval Europe occupied a strange, often contradictory position. Some gained autonomy, especially if they inherited land or property. Others became immediate burdens, shuffled into convents or into second marriages before the body was cold. Your neighbors treat you like a statue cracked in half. Some bring bread, others bring gossip. She'll remarry, one says. Too young, not to, another agrees, unless she's cursed. You sit through condolences like a polite audience, hands folded, eyes lowered. The stew goes cold. You don't care. At the funeral, the priest intones all the proper words, dust and breath and mercy, but his eyes keep flicking to you like he's worried you'll do something inappropriate, like breathe too deeply or smile. You don't. You wear black for the first time in your life, not because you want to, because it's expected. The color wraps around you like armor, heavy, hot, unflattering. It says do not touch, but people still do. The baker offers you extra bread. The butcher gives you a cut of meat too fine for mourning. The messages are clear: a husband might be gone, but a womb is forever. Historians still argue whether widowhood improved women's legal status or just changed the rules of control. In some regions, widows could manage property, sue for debts, or run a business. In others, they were expected to remarry as fast as decency allowed, or else face suspicion. You inherit your husband's boots and his debts, and technically a third of his land, but only until your son comes of age. Which is funny because you don't have a son. You know what that means. You are a placeholder now. A warm body keeping the soil from being fought over. No one says it directly, but every knock on the door sounds like someone measuring your value. A merchant offers to help you manage the accounts. You say no. The next day, someone slanders you at market. Cold-hearted, they mutter. Already thinking like a man. You look at the bread you're kneading and imagine shaping it into a fist. There's a kind of freedom in widowhood, but it's shaped like a trapdoor. You can go through it, yes, but you can't choose where you'll land. If you cry too little, you're hard. If you cry too much, you're hysterical. If you don't remarry, you're a witch. If you remarry too soon, you're a harlot. There's no right way to be alone. One neighbor suggests you move in with your cousin's family. It would be easier, she says, eyes darting. Less lonely. You smile. You've never once felt more like yourself than you do now, standing in a doorway your husband doesn't fill anymore. You say, I'll manage. They don't like that answer. One evening you walk to the edge of the field where the sky bruises the earth. No veil, no husband's name pressing down your spine. The wind moves differently around you now, like it finally has space. And you realize no one is waiting to be served. No one is timing your silence. No one is watching to see if your hem is too high or your eyes too bold. You are untethered. And that makes you dangerous. Fringe tidbit. In some medieval towns, widows formed small communities, informal but tightly bonded. They supported one another, passed down herbs and recipes, even arranged secret loans for women trying to avoid remarriage. Unofficial guilds of survival. You dream of joining one. A cottage shared by 3 women who've seen enough, who know the rules and laugh anyway, who plant garlic and say whatever they please, who take in strays, both 4-legged and 2. But reality wakes you with roosters and unpaid taxes. You still need to function. You still need to eat. And the world does not care that you just lost something. It only cares what you still have. A midwife visits one day asking if you'll help with a difficult birth. You're no expert, but you have hands and a steady voice. You go. You assist. The baby cries. The mother thanks you. Later, someone says she's useful for a widow. It's meant kindly, but you feel the leash in it. You decide to be more than useful. You decide to be necessary. You mend things. You learn accounts. You start to write your name with a bit of flair, just enough to remind yourself you have one. But you also listen. To the way people talk about you. To the way men lower their voices when you pass. To the way the priest starts emphasizing womanly obedience in his sermons again. Because they know what a widow can become. Unmonitored, unowned, unbothered. They won't say it, but you can feel it in their glances. She could do anything. So you pretend not to notice. You smile. You knead the dough. You pay your debts. And every night you lie in a bed that no one climbs into. And every morning you wake up more yourself than the day before. No one claps. No one praises. But the silence no longer feels like an empty room. It feels like a beginning. You smell it before you see it. A pungent mix of dried thyme, crushed nettle, and the faint copper tang of blood. The room is warm, too warm and thick with sweat, and prayers muttered into folds of cloth. A woman groans. Not the high, startled scream of pain, but the low, ancient moan of effort. She is giving birth, and you are here to help, or to witness, or possibly to carry blame if things go wrong. This is the realm of the midwife. She isn't a doctor. She isn't a priest. She's something older, stranger, stitched together from instinct trial and stories passed mouth to ear like contraband. Her hands are cracked but skilled. Her apron is stained and sacred. You've watched her work before. She moves like someone who's seen everything and learned when to speak, when to shout, and when to say nothing at all. The woman in labor is pale, slick with oil and fear. Her husband hovers uselessly by the door. You hand the midwife a clean cloth. She nods. She'll be fine if no one panics, she mutters. Mainstream historical fact. In the Middle Ages, midwives were indispensable to communities, especially among the peasantry and lower classes. Many women never saw a physician in their lifetime, relying entirely on these village experts during birth, illness, and miscarriage. You've seen the ledger in the priest's office. Midwife names scribbled in neat lists, followed sometimes by ominous question marks. A tick, a tiny cross, a word like suspicious. Because with knowledge comes power, and with power, well, you know how that ends for women. There's a saying, the priest baptizes the child, the midwife saves the mother. But only one of them is considered holy. You've heard the whispers, that some midwives know too much, that they use herbs to ease pain, or worse, to stop conception entirely, that they chant prayers not found in any psalter, that they can tell a child's sex just by pressing 2 fingers beneath the ribs. Fringe tidbit. In some regions, midwives carried a birth knife, a small, blessed blade used to symbolically cut pain or ward off death. They'd wave it over the mother's belly and murmur verses. Superstition, maybe. Comfort, absolutely. This midwife has no knife today, just her hands, her voice, and a carved wooden cross hanging around her neck. She ties back the laboring woman's hair. She whispers, "Push, love. You've done harder things." You wonder if that's true. You wonder if surviving this world as a woman isn't the hardest thing. The baby comes at dawn, blue, limp, and terrifyingly quiet until the midwife blows sharply in its face and rubs its back hard enough to wake the dead. It sputters, then howls. Everyone exhales. But you see the midwife's face. Calm, yes, but lined with calculations. She saw the edge. She's seen it many times. Later, over weak ale and stale bread, she tells you, "I've buried more children than I've named." Don't let that be your job if you can help it. You nod, unsure if it's a warning or an invitation. You start helping her regularly. It's not official, just understood. You carry water, clean linens, pass herbs. You learn to tell the difference between a scream of pain and a scream of fear. You learn how to stop bleeding with crushed yarrow. You learn that silence is often the best medicine. You also learn that when a birth goes wrong, it's always the woman's fault. Too old, too young, too proud, too sinful, too tired. Even when it isn't said aloud, you hear it in the tone. You feel it in the glances. Historians still argue whether the Church's suspicion of midwives was grounded in genuine theological concern or simple gendered power struggle. It doesn't matter. Suspicion is sticky. Once it touches you, it never washes off. You start to notice which women in the village clutch their bellies during feast days, which ones eat less, speak less, flinch when their husbands touch them. You say nothing. You simply start carrying a pouch of pennyroyal wherever you go. One girl, barely married, whispers to you, "I can't carry another. I won't." You don't ask questions. You brew the tea. You pray silently that it works and that no one finds out. You're told later that she fainted in church and was sent to a nunnery for quiet reflection. You suspect she reflects more clearly now than she ever did before. A priest once stops you on the road, asks if you know anything about ungodly plants. You shrug. All plants are God's father. He doesn't smile. Later, you move your herbs farther from the window. The midwife keeps her tools in a chest with a false bottom. Inside, dried leaves, beeswax, a tiny book of handwritten notes, mostly herbal recipes, though one page has a charm written in symbols you don't recognize. You never ask. You just memorize it. She tells you one night, every birth is a bet. You gamble the body. You pray for the soul. You believe her, but not everyone does. You hear a story from the next town over. A midwife accused of witchcraft after a noble woman's child was stillborn. The priest claimed she'd used a cursed poultice. No one defended her. She was gone within the week. Some say she fled. Others say she burned. You ask the midwife if she's afraid. Always, she says. But fear's just another tool. Like salt, used right, it saves things. You start sleeping with salt under your pillow. There's a little boy with fevered skin and glazed eyes. You rub his feet with mustard oil and place rosemary under his tongue. He lives. His mother calls it a miracle. The priest says it was prayer. You say nothing. You've learned by now miracles are only holy if a man says them aloud. You begin to understand what the midwife really does. She doesn't just deliver babies, she delivers women from pain, from ignorance, from the trap of believing their bodies belong to others. She carries knowledge the church can't canonize. She keeps alive secrets too valuable to write down. She survives quietly, efficiently, invisibly. You wonder if you could become that. You hope so. Because you've seen the inside of the system now. You've touched blood that shouldn't have been spilled. You've watched life arrive screaming and watched mothers go silent forever. And you know this truth. There are two kinds of power in this world. One that's spoken from the pulpit, and one whispered in the back room with a rag in one hand and a knife in the other. And sometimes when the screaming starts, it's not the priest you pray for. It's the midwife. It arrives like clockwork, or a curse, or both. The first time it's a shock. You think you're dying. You think you've been marked. You think this must be the punishment the priest spoke of, the red serpent, the stain of Eve come crawling out of you every month to remind you that sin is not just a concept. It's a cycle. Your mother finds you pale and trembling behind the woodshed. She says nothing at first, just wraps you in a rough cloth and leads you to the stream. She washes your legs with cold water and mutters a prayer through gritted teeth. That's your introduction to womanhood, ice water shame, and a warning not to tell your brothers. Mainstream historical fact. In much of medieval Europe, menstruation was seen as both taboo and medically misunderstood. It was often linked to sin, impurity, or demonic influence. Some theologians even claimed menstrual blood was cursed, unnatural, or dangerous to crops and animals. You are now considered unclean once a month. Not spiritually? Well, yes, that too, but physically. You're not allowed near the altar. You're discouraged from handling food. Some say you shouldn't milk the cows or touch iron tools. It curdles things, they whisper. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were based on religious doctrine or folk superstition. Either way, the result is the same isolation, suspicion, and the quiet sense that your body has betrayed you again. You try not to draw attention to it. You wrap cloth rags tight, knot them like secrets between your legs. You walk stiffly for 3 days every month. You wash your skirts in secret. You burn one that stained too red and wouldn't come clean. No one helps. No one asks. The older women give you advice, some kind, some terrifying. Put nettles under your mattress. Pray to Saint Margaret. Don't touch bread dough or it won't rise. Drink vinegar if it lasts too long. Never sit on a stone bench while bleeding. You follow them all, just in case. Fringe tidbit: in parts of rural England and Germany, women on their periods were forbidden from entering wine cellars. Allegedly, their presence could turn the wine sour. No one explains why. You suspect no one ever questioned it. There's a girl named Line who bleeds too heavily. Her lips go white. She sleeps for days. The midwife brews her a tea of ironwort and raspberry leaves. It helps. For a while. Then she stops bleeding altogether. She's 15. They say she's been blessed. You're not so sure. Another girl, Marjorie, starts early. Too early. She's barely 10. The boys tease her. The priest makes her sit in the back pew. Her mother cries in the bathhouse, holding her stained shift like it's proof of sin. You wonder what they'll do with her, or to her, because the church doesn't have a ceremony for this. No blessing, no rite, no saints assigned to greet you at the door of menstruation, only the vague implication that you should suffer in silence and apologize for the inconvenience. You do your best. You keep your rags hidden. You boil them in lye water once a month and hang them to dry behind the henhouse pinned to the inside wall. Once your brother finds one and waves it around like a flag, you slap him so hard his lip bleeds. He doesn't do it again. Sometimes you think about Saint Bridget, one of the few saints who they say miraculously removed her own fertility to avoid marriage. You wonder if that story's even real. You hope it is. You start tracking the moons more carefully. You learn the signs, the heaviness, the dreams, the strange ache in your knees. You know when it's coming. You still dread it. You bleed while tending the fire one morning. You don't notice until your shift is already streaked dark. You excuse yourself. The men roll their eyes. One says another of Eve's daughters unwell. You want to throw the poker at him. Instead, you smile sweetly and say, "If only your kind hadn't eaten the apple." Even the midwife laughs at that. You ask her once quietly if there's a way to stop the bleeding forever. She raises one eyebrow and says yes, but you'd miss it more than you think. You don't believe her. But part of you wonders what it would mean to never bleed again. To never feel this reminder of your place in the chain of pain and procreation. Because that's what it is, isn't it? A countdown. A signal to the world that your womb is active, ready, desirable, dangerous. You start to notice how others treat you during those days. More distant, more careful. The priest avoids eye contact. Your father tells you to keep your condition to yourself. Your friends, when they're not also bleeding, walk on eggshells around you. You feel radioactive, and somehow they blame you for it. Even when you're clean, the ghost of it lingers. The stain on the bedroll, the bucket of pink-tinged water, the memory of a week where your whole body felt like it was unraveling from the inside. You begin to hate the word curse, because it means punishment, and you're not sure what you did. You dream one night that you're standing in church bleeding openly. Your skirt is soaked. No one notices. You walk to the altar. You kneel. You pray. Still no one notices. You feel both powerful and invisible. You wake crying. Somewhere deep down, you wish for something different. Not to be rid of your body, but to be forgiven for having it. Or better yet, to stop needing forgiveness at all. You write a poem carefully on a scrap of wax tablet. Each moon I pay the price for fruit I never tasted. You erase it before anyone sees. Because writing about blood is worse than bleeding. Even in private. Even in prayer. And so you go on. You prepare the rags. You boil the water. You press your palms to your stomach and breathe through the ache. Because being a woman in the Middle Ages isn't just about survival. It's about carrying silence like a secret inside your skin and never letting it stain the floor. It starts with a whisper. It always does. A girl is seen vomiting behind the granary, pale, tired, walking slow. Her name is Cecily, and she's been engaged to a miller's apprentice for 2 years with no wedding in sight. Someone says she's been blessed. Someone else says ruined. You know what they mean. She's pregnant and not married, which means her soul is now a public matter, her belly a battleground, her future hanging by a thread sewn by strangers. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, pregnancy outside of wedlock was not just scandalous, it was criminal in many places. The woman could be fined, shunned, exiled, or forced into humiliating public penance. The man, if identified, faced far less. Cecily is made to stand at the front of the church during Sunday Mass wearing a rough smock and no shoes. Her hair is loose. She's made to hold a candle nearly as long as her arm. Her eyes stay on the floor the entire time. The priest calls her a warning to the others. You want to scream. But you watch and you bow your head with the rest, because your anger won't change the rules. It'll only make you look guilty too. Historians still argue whether this kind of public penance was meant to correct shame or simply remind everyone watching that women's bodies were always being judged, not just in the confessional, but in the public square. Cecily disappears a week later. Some say she's been sent to a convent. Others say she fled. One rumor says she lost the baby and was buried in the woods by her aunt quietly before the snow could settle too deep. No one agrees on the truth. Everyone agrees it's her fault. You've seen it before. Not just here. In every village, every chapel, every whispered corner of the market. A girl gets too close to a boy. Or the wrong boy. Or maybe not at all, just alone at the wrong time. And suddenly she's fallen. One girl, Annalise, went to confession 3 times a week. When her belly swelled, the priest blamed her for seducing God's mercy into silence. She hadn't even looked at a boy in months. You remember her eyes the day she was marched through town. They looked like candle ends. Burned out, still hot. Fringe tidbit. In some medieval parishes, unmarried pregnant women were forced to walk a sin path, a ritualized route through the town barefoot, and veiled carrying stones or dragging chains while neighbors watched in silence. Some threw wilted flowers, others threw worse. The worst part, these rituals were always for the women. You once asked why men weren't made to do the same. The midwife chuckled. Because they get to confess. You get to carry. You wonder who made that rule. You learn quickly to recognize the signs. A girl who stops laughing. A girl who avoids the well. A girl who suddenly wears looser dresses and never eats in public. You see them all. You say nothing, because no one says anything. Silence is safety. One night you hear the blacksmith's daughter sobbing behind the chapel. You bring her water. She won't look at you. She won't say his name. She just says, "I didn't ask." And that's enough to make you sick. You find out later the priest sent her away for healing. You know what that means. You don't know if she'll come back. Sometimes the man marries the girl. A quick ceremony, a forced smile, a veil hastily stitched. They call it setting things right. But everyone remembers, especially her. They say a girl who conceives outside of marriage is marked, that her future children will carry the sin like mud on their heels, that the land she touches might sour, that her prayers won't rise as high. You once asked if that made Jesus a bastard since Mary wasn't married at conception. The room went so quiet you could hear someone's spoon shake. You weren't allowed in the chapel for a week. Mainstream church doctrine stated that marriage sanctified sexual union, but outside of it, even consensual acts were mortal sins. Pregnancy was the visible proof, and women's bodies being visible became the proof of sin. Men could sin in silence. You don't get that option. Even the midwife gets cautious. She starts carrying a rosary when summoned to an unmarried girl's bedside. Not to pray for evidence, in case someone accuses her of aiding a secret abortion. Because a midwife doesn't just deliver babies. Sometimes she delivers blame. There's one girl, Matilda, who hides her belly until the very end. Claims she's just bloated. Bad meat, she says, week after week. Then one night the baby comes early, and her mother finds her in the straw holding it like a secret too late to keep. The child is dead. No one knows if it was born that way. The priest declares it murder. The villagers call it shame. You call it tragedy, but only to yourself. They dig a shallow grave outside consecrated ground. They don't give the baby a name. You remember Matilda's voice when she said, "I didn't think it would happen," because no one tells you how it happens, only what it costs. You once read in the margins of a crumbling psalter, "The body does not ask permission. The world punishes it anyway." You don't know who wrote it. You think they must have been very tired. You start sleeping with a knife under your pillow, not because you think it'll help, just because you want to believe you have some say in what happens to you. You learn which herbs bring sleep, which herbs stop pain, which herbs might stop something else, though you never write that down. And still the rules hang over you. Don't be alone. Don't be too friendly. Don't laugh. Don't trust. Don't want. Because want is dangerous. Want is how girls like Cecily get candles pressed into their hands and names erased from family prayers. You walk the long way home now. You avoid eye contact with boys. You lower your voice, you dull your smile, because you've seen what happens to girls who get caught by curiosity. Not by sin, not even by men, just by the rules. And you know this, if you fall, they won't ask how. They'll ask who saw you fall, and why you didn't land more quietly. It begins with a smell. Sweet, acrid cloying, like burning flowers and boiling pitch. Someone says a woman has been taken. No one says her name. They don't need to. You all know who they mean. She lived near the edge of the woods, sold ointments mostly, helped ease childbirth pains, carved charms into dried apples for babies to hold. Once told a nobleman's son that his fever wasn't from sin, but from swamp water in his lungs. He got better. She got suspicious. And now her cottage smolders. You arrive too late to see the fire, but not too late to smell the warning, "Be careful what you know." Mainstream historical fact. Accusations of witchcraft began to rise across Europe toward the end of the Middle Ages, especially in the 14th and 15th centuries. Often older women, midwives, healers, and social outcasts were targeted, usually without evidence, just suspicion and fear. You used to call her Aunt Elva, even though you weren't related. She gave you your first sprig of dried sage, taught you that lavender near the bed helps with sleep and sometimes dreams. You wonder where she is now. You hope she ran. You pray she ran. But you've heard how it usually ends. A confession pressed from bruised ribs. A stake. A crowd. Some mutter a psalm. Some cheer. Some just stare. You've never seen a burning. Not yet. But the thought haunts you like smoke in your lungs you can't cough out. Fringe tidbit. In parts of France and the Holy Roman Empire, authorities used a witch's chair, a spiked seat, where accused women were made to sit until they confessed. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. No blood was shed, but that was the point. Pain without proof. The midwife tells you to stay quiet. Don't speak of herbs unless you're cutting them. Don't mention dreams. Don't touch your own wrists in public. You nod. You cut your rosemary bush down to a stub. You try to forget what Elva taught you. You can't. A priest preaches the next Sunday on the dangers of feminine whispers. He says Satan finds easy lodgings in idle tongues. He says where herbs grow wild, sin is close behind. You've never hated parsley so much. A girl named Rosamond is next. Not burned, just accused. Her sheep wander too far. A cow dies. A child catches fever and doesn't recover. She owns 3 cats. She wears green, she talks to herself. That's all it takes. They drag her to the chapel steps and make her recite the credo backwards. She stumbles. They beat her with a switch made from hazel. They make her wear a wreath of thorns and kneel in ash. You ask the midwife why hazel. It's supposed to drive out deceit. And if there is no deceit, you ask. She shrugs. The branch doesn't care. Rosamond is never seen again. Some say she went to the mountains. Others say she was taken in the night not by devils but by men who claim to fight them. You start sleeping lighter. You throw out your store of crushed pennyroyal. You burn your tiny book of copied remedies. You pretend not to know the difference between mugwort and mint, because knowing too much is as dangerous as speaking too loud. You hear of another woman 2 towns over. They say she turned her neighbor's butter sour with just a glare, that she stopped a birth mid-labor by cursing the wind, that she danced in the woods with shadows. You know none of it is true, but truth isn't currency here. Fear is. Historians still argue whether early witch accusations were driven by religious fervor, economic tension, or social anxiety. All 3 probably. Add in a bad harvest or a plague and someone's always looking for a scapegoat. Preferably one with a womb and a strong opinion. You keep your opinions to yourself, but inside they gather like storm clouds. You dream of Elva again. In the dream, she's laughing. She's grinding herbs with her bare hands and flinging the dust into the wind. When you ask her why, she says, "So they remember what we were before they rewrote us." You wake up angry, but you smile anyway. You start going to church more often. You cross yourself twice. You mutter responses louder than needed. You bake oatcakes with blessed water. Everyone sees your virtue. No one sees the thistle root hidden under your mattress, because you haven't stopped knowing. You just know better now than to share. Even children are taught to report odd behavior. You watch your neighbor's daughter mimic your walk. She asks, "Why do you talk to plants?" You say, "Because they listen better than people." The next day, someone slashes your herb garden. You don't plant another. One night, the midwife tells you about a woman who wore an herb sachet to bed every night. For good dreams, for safety, for nothing at all. Her husband found it. He called the priest. They cut her hair. They made her fast. They shaved a cross into her scalp and locked her in the chapel for 3 days. The midwife says she never spoke again, not even to herself. You want to cry, but you don't. Because tears are evidence of something. And right now, your best weapon is ambiguity. You think of the stories you've heard. Of the wise woman who whispered to bees. Of the girl who sang to the moon and was swallowed by it. Of the woman who buried her stillborn child and carved her grief into bark, then vanished. None of them had names, only titles. Witch, harlot, tempter, crone. You wonder what you'll be called when your time comes. You decide to choose your own title, quietly. For now, because knowledge is dangerous. But silence is survival. You're not supposed to speak in church. Not really. Not as yourself. Women may chant in the choir if permitted. You can whisper prayers, answer liturgies, and practiced Latin, maybe sing the Magnificat if your voice is pretty and the bishop's not visiting. But speak, preach, declare. That's for men, and yet you hear about her. A woman, preaching, loudly. They say she stood in the square, barefoot and wild-eyed, quoting scripture like it had burned itself into her lungs. Her words, not just pious, accusatory. The church has abandoned its mothers, she shouted, and worships the womb only when it's convenient. Her name is gone from the official record, replaced by labels heretic, hysteric, harlot. Take your pick, the result is the same. She vanished by morning. Mainstream historical fact. The church strictly forbade women from preaching during most of the medieval period. Canon law declared that women could not speak authoritatively on scripture. Yet despite this, female mystics, visionaries, and lay preachers emerged especially during times of upheaval. Historians still argue whether these women were truly revolutionary or simply byproducts of religious fervor. But that debate too is framed by men. You hear her words echoed in places she's never been, in the way the abbess grips her rosary tighter when the bishop visits, in the way Sister Agnes accidentally reads aloud from the Song of Songs with a smile on her face, in the way girls recite scripture as they walk to market, half mocking, half rehearsing, hoping they might one day say it for real. You feel it too, something inside you that wants to speak, not in whispers, not in shadows. You remember once during Mass you corrected a boy's Latin. He'd misquoted Matthew. He said Beatus est vir when it should have been Beatus vir. You said it gently under your breath. He looked at you like you'd grown horns. The priest told your mother you were being intellectually immodest. You were 8. You stopped correcting anyone after that. But now as a woman, your silence has grown teeth, and lately it's begun to bite. You study scripture in secret, not to rebel at first, just to understand. You find verses that seem made for you. He hath put down the mighty from their seats and exalted the humble. The Lord gave the word great was the company of women that published it. You copy that last one onto a piece of linen and stitch it into your underskirt. Not a declaration, just a secret, a hope. You hear rumors of women gathering outside the city walls, reading, preaching, not as nuns or noble women, but as equals, as believers. Some call them the poor sisters, others the silent light. The church calls them unauthorized. You wonder if they're dangerous. You hope so. Fringe tidbit. In the 13th century, a movement called the Beguines flourished in parts of Northern Europe. These were women who lived semi-monastic lives without taking permanent vows. They taught, healed, preached informally, and were often accused of heresy, especially when they gained followers. You once met a traveling woman who wore no veil and carried a psalter covered in ashcloth. She spoke in riddles, told you the church is a ship, but the sea is not hers. You didn't understand then. You do now. You start speaking in small ways. At the well, by the fire. You quote scripture carefully. You ask questions like, if God speaks to men, why not women? And if wisdom is personified as female in Proverbs, shouldn't she be allowed to teach your friends laugh nervously? But they don't tell you to stop. One Mary begins writing verses of her own, not from the Bible, her own, prayers she made up, psalms for people who cry too loud. She hides them under a loose brick in the chapel floor. You read them at night. You feel seen. You decide to write your own, but not yet, not where they can find them. The priest gives a sermon on silence as salvation. He says a woman's voice unguarded is like a well without a wall. You hear the men murmur approval. You feel your fists tighten. You whisper to yourself, then let me be the flood. One day you see a girl stand during Mass. Just stand, not speak, not gesture, just rise still and shaking. Everyone stares. The priest falters. No one moves. After a full minute, she sits back down. She's scolded afterward, of course. But something changed. You can feel it. Not in the room, in the women. They walk differently the next day. Not boldly, but less hunched. And you think maybe the silence is cracking. One evening in the garden, you read aloud to the chickens. It's a passage from Judith, yes, that Judith, the one who beheaded the general to save her people. You read it with a whisper that grows louder word by word until you catch yourself shouting, "The Lord hath smitten him by the hand of a woman," you freeze. No one hears, except the hens. They seem impressed. You laugh. You decide to read every day, even if it's only to the hens. One night you imagine preaching, not in a pulpit, just standing in a field. No veil, no shame. Saying something worth hearing. Maybe you say, "God does not fear my voice, only men do." Maybe they listen, maybe they don't. But either way you speak. Because what's the worst that happens? You're silenced, you already are. So you might as well sing first. Behind the thick stone walls, beneath the ever-chiming bells, under habits and holy vows, there are secrets. The convent, they tell you, is a refuge, a holy shelter, a place where women can retreat from the world, from men, from sin. But you learn fast it's not an escape, it's a reshaping. The outside world is loud in its judgments. This one is quieter, more refined, but just as sharp. You arrive not as a nun, but as a guest, a helper, a possible novice, a watcher. The building itself is cool and clean with long corridors and the smell of dried lavender lingering in the linen stores. The abbess greets you with a nod that feels more like a warning than a welcome. Her veil is crisp, her eyes sharper than the knives used in the kitchen. Mainstream historical fact: medieval convents were centers of literacy, art, and power for women, but only within rigid constraints. Nuns were expected to live in chastity, poverty, and obedience. Though many convents developed their own hierarchies, politics, and internal freedoms. Your first night, you're assigned a pallet beside a nun who murmurs in her sleep. Her name is Sister Heloise, and she grips her rosary like it's holding her together. She never looks directly at you, only sideways, like you're a thought she's not allowed to finish. You don't ask questions, but you watch. In the daylight, the nuns chant psalms and scrub floors. They speak softly, moving with practiced grace. But at night, they become something else. They laugh. Not loudly, not always, but enough. You hear whispers behind the garden wall. You hear giggles over midnight bread and stolen jam. You hear humming. And once you hear your name followed by someone shushing it quickly. This is not what they told you convent life would be. There's a nun, Sister Beata, who writes poetry on scraps of discarded parchment and hides them inside her mattress. They're about longing mostly. Sometimes for God, sometimes for a woman with dark eyes and ink-stained fingers. You pretend not to notice. You find that silence here is layered. It means obedience, but it also means discretion. Secrets are traded with looks, favors are exchanged without words, and confession becomes both shield and sword. You're assigned to help in the scriptorium, copying, sorting, scraping vellum smooth. Sister Clara oversees your work. She speaks in measured tones, but once leaves you alone with a banned text for just long enough. When you glance up, she says nothing, just raises one brow and closes the door behind her. Historians still argue whether convents were hotbeds of rebellion or simply sanctuaries misread by modern eyes. But there's no doubt many nuns wrote, studied, questioned, and occasionally challenged church doctrine through their work, even if only in footnotes. You read Hildegard's visions. You copy lines that say God's voice is not only male. You don't speak it aloud, but you copy them twice. One nun, Sister Julienne, collects herbs from the convent garden under the pretense of making tonics. You've seen her recipes. They're useful. They're also unapproved. You ask her once if she fears being found out. She says, if we followed all the rules, we'd be buried before breakfast. And there's food. Not just gruel and porridge. They smuggle in pastries. Someone no one will admit who has access to honey. On feast days, you find a candied fig on your plate like a wink. You learn how to pray without believing every word. You learn how to nod without agreeing. You learn how to stay still long enough for people to forget you're listening. You also learn who not to cross. The abbess is merciful but watchful. She has no patience for hysteria, fainting, or attachments. When two younger nuns are caught clasping hands too long in the orchard, they're separated, their hair shorn to the scalp, and assigned to opposite wings. No one speaks of it. Except one night, Sister Heloise whispers, "They were in love." And then softer, "So were we." You don't sleep that night. Fringe tidbit. In several known cases, medieval nuns exchanged intimate letters, poems, and devotional gifts to each other. These writings walk a blurred line between spiritual ecstasy and romantic longing. Some even signed with terms like "your chosen soul wife." You begin to receive notes, folded into your habits, tucked under your ink pot. Lines like "your voice still echoes in the psalms I sing." "Meet me by the vines. I knew you before we met." You're not sure who writes them. You don't ask. You keep them all. Even joy here is carefully rationed. You laugh once at a joke Sister Clara makes, and she hisses, "Quiet," before the stone hears us. You don't know what that means, but you stop laughing above a whisper. One evening, you climb to the belfry, alone, just to feel higher than the walls. The wind is sharp, the bells are still, and for a moment you let yourself imagine that you could stay here forever. Not as a prisoner, not as a bride of Christ, just as a woman among women. No men telling you your worth, no children tearing your body apart, no priest misquoting scripture and calling it law, just ink, bread, soft-footed steps, and secrets tucked like violets between the pages of psalters. But you know it wouldn't last. Even here, rules grow like moss, and eventually someone would tell you to bind your voice, to forget the touch of a shoulder that lingers, to cleanse your thoughts and swallow your questions. Still, you think there are worse prisons. This one at least comes with poetry. They say clothes make the man, but for you, they define the woman. You're not dressing for comfort, not for beauty, not even for warmth. You're dressing for surveillance. Because what you wear tells the world what you're worth and how far you've fallen. Sumptuary laws, they're called. Little rules turned into big threats. Somewhere, someone with a quill and a god complex decided that silk was for the high-born, fur was for the licensed, and anything too nice on someone too poor was a sign of arrogance or sin. Mainstream historical fact. Sumptuary laws were enacted across medieval Europe to regulate clothing, jewelry, and even shoe height, often tied to class, gender, and moral behavior. For women, these laws doubled as a kind of mobile chastity belt, modesty mandated in fabric. You hear of a girl who wore a velvet-trimmed hem to a festival. She borrowed it from her cousin just for fun. She danced once, laughed twice, and was fined 3 days later for clothing above her station. The velvet was confiscated. Her shoes, too. Her cousin was slapped by the magistrate's wife. They say the girl stopped wearing color after that. You don't own velvet, but you know what's forbidden to you anyway. Ermine-dyed, scarlet-laced bodices with pearl buttons. That last one's considered provocative, as if a button ever made a man forget his vows. There's an old woman who remembers the last time the sumptuary inspector came to town. He carried a tiny book filled with fabric swatches. "Feel this," he told her. "This is above your name." You touch your sleeve reflexively. Wool, dyed with nettle, scratchy and obedient. Fringe tidbit. In Venice, a married woman caught wearing silk without a license could be sentenced to a public whipping or made to wear a burlap dress stitched with her husband's name, a walking apology embroidered by hand. You once helped sew that burlap. The thread snapped 5 times. You snapped once. And then there's the matter of hair. Uncovered hair signals youth availability, and if it's red, suspicion. Hair worn too elaborately is vanity. Hair too short, repentance. Hair loose and damp, witchcraft. You know a widow who used to braid roses into her hair before Mass. After her second marriage failed, she shaved her head. People say it was punishment. Others say she did it herself. She smiles now, though. That unnerves people more. Historians still argue whether sumptuary laws were more about maintaining class structure or suppressing female expression. You believe it's both. The rich wanted to stay rich, and the men wanted to see only what made them comfortable. You try to follow the rules, but rules change. In one town, red is reserved for nobility. In another, it's the color of sin. In some places, green means fertility. In others, seduction. You once wore green to a wedding and were asked if you were seeking company. You were 13. Even your shoes are watched. Heels higher than a finger's width, arrogance. Pointed toes, French corruption. You wear plain ones. They still blister your heels by dusk. One girl stitches silver thread into her bodice. Not real silver, just dyed twine. She's accused of impersonating a lady. Her father is fined. Her bodice is burned. They say her punishment was proportional. You wonder what the proportion is between thread and humiliation. You try to keep it simple. Linen in summer, wool in winter, gray-brown faded blue if you're lucky. No lace, no shimmer, no curves that the wrong man might notice and the wrong woman might envy. You're told to cover your collarbone, your knees, your ankles, your shoulders, your wrists, your thoughts, but never your smile. That's expected, even when it hurts. You've noticed the double standard. A man can wear gold rings and feathered hats and no one calls him sinful. A woman wears a ribbon too bright and suddenly she's asking for judgment. One priest preaches that a woman's clothing should reflect her soul. You wonder if your hemline makes you damned. You once wore a belt with a polished buckle. Just a bit of shine. You liked how it caught the light. That day, 3 women avoided eye contact. One said, "Careful, someone might mistake you for enjoying yourself. You haven't worn that belt since." Mainstream rules also punish adornment. Earrings are a gateway, necklaces suspect, kohl-lined eyes, harlotry, perfumed gloves, witchcraft, a single painted fingernail, pride. You're told beauty is allowed, but only if you didn't mean it. And then there's the veil. You must wear one, but not a fancy one. Not too thin, not too colorful, not adorned. Just enough to hide your face while still proving it's pleasant underneath. A woman once tried to protest these laws. She was wealthy, unmarried, educated. She said, "I will wear what I earn." They said, "You will wear what you're told." She left town. Some say she became a merchant's mistress in Genoa. Others say she joined a convent. You hope she became a legend. Sometimes you dream of clothing you're not allowed to wear. Velvet, fur, gold-threaded sleeves. You dream of stepping into the street and daring someone to stop you. You wake up sweating. You do own one indulgence, a red ribbon, hidden in your pillowcase. You've never worn it in public. Just once alone in front of a cracked mirror, you tied it around your neck. You looked dangerous and beautiful. You untied it fast. Because clothing here isn't just fabric, it's language. It tells people who to ignore, who to punish, who to believe. It is not fashion, it is control, and it's stitched into every seam of your life. They tell you silence is a virtue, that a quiet woman is a holy woman, that stillness is strength, that speaking too much or too clearly is a sign of vanity, rebellion, or worse, intelligence. So you learn to measure your voice, not your volume, your value. Every word you speak is weighed, judged, considered for tone, for timing, for the shape your mouth makes when you say it. You learn early that even truth, if said by the wrong tongue, becomes trouble. Mainstream historical fact. Throughout the Middle Ages, church and secular law alike reinforced the idea that women should be silent. St. Paul's command, "Let your women keep silence in the churches," was echoed in sermons, legal rulings, and household guides. A woman who spoke too freely risked everything from social censure to physical punishment. You start to notice how often women end their sentences with downward eyes, with an apology, with a step backward. You do it too. Not because you believe it makes you better, but because you know it makes you safer. There's a saying in your village, a still tongue keeps the peace. But it doesn't. It keeps secrets. It keeps power in the wrong hands. You remember the first time you tried to speak your mind, really speak it. You were 16. A man had just interrupted a reading lesson to correct the word mercy, claiming it was justice. You disagreed, politely, calmly, factually. He laughed. The priest gave you a warning. Your father gave you a bruise. Historians still argue whether these silencing tactics were systemic oppression or culturally embedded tradition. You argue that it doesn't matter. Silence enforced by fear still sounds the same. In town, there's a woman called Mother Mag. She doesn't speak, not a word. Some say she took a vow. Others say she was punished. You once asked her a question, and she simply tapped the table 3 times and left. You've never forgotten the sound. There's another woman, Lady T, wealthy, educated, formidable. She hosts salons where only women gather behind locked doors and thick curtains. It's said they read books aloud. Real ones, with ideas. Some even talk about law. That's dangerous, which means it's probably true. You hear someone whisper that she owns a copy of The Book of the City of Ladies, a French text written by a woman for women, a text that argues openly that women have been silenced not by nature but by design. Fringe tidbit Christine de Pizan wrote that very book in 1405, constructing a symbolic city where women's accomplishments, virtues, and wisdom were protected against misogynistic slander. It was one of the first known feminist texts in European literature. You want to see that book? You'd risk a great deal just to touch the edge of a page. But until then, you practice your silence. You speak only when needed. You lower your voice when questioned. You smile when corrected. You bow your head when accused. Because silence is not submission. Not really. It's strategy. There's a girl named Sabine who couldn't stay quiet. She asked too many questions about saints who died of starvation. She wondered aloud if perhaps self-inflicted pain wasn't holiness, but despair. She was sent away. For discipline. No one knows where. You wonder sometimes if the silence they want from you is just another way of carving the world to fit their hands. You begin keeping a private book. Just notes. Observations. Words you aren't allowed to say, written in ink so faint they barely exist. You write things like, "I knew the answer," but the silence was louder. If Eve spoke to a serpent, at least she was heard. God made my mouth. Men built the lock. You hide the book in a false bottom of a chest. If found, it would be considered arrogant, even dangerous. A woman with her own words is always one step away from trial. You think of Joan of Arc, Jeanne, burned not just for visions, but for speaking them. They called her a heretic, but what they hated most was her voice, and her armor, and the way she didn't apologize. There's a punishment called the scold's bridle, an iron mask with a tongue-pressing spike placed over a woman's head to keep her from talking. You've never seen one in person, only heard of it. That's enough. You imagine what it would feel like. Not the pain, the humiliation, the silence forced into you instead of chosen. Sometimes when you're alone, you practice speaking. Just a few words. Not prayers, not pleasantries, just truths. That's not correct. I have something to say. Let me finish. They taste strange on your tongue, like fruit that's ripened in the dark. You write them down. You dream of using them one day. At the feast of St. Catherine, you're asked to recite a passage. You choose a psalm that praises wisdom in a woman's mouth. The priest raises his eyebrows, but he doesn't stop you. Afterward, one woman nods, just once, and you feel it. Not approval, recognition. You realize that silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of control. And sometimes keeping your voice is the loudest rebellion of all. You're sitting in confession knees, sore from the stone floor, trying to remember how many times you've been damned this week. Not for murder or theft, those would be easy to count, but for smaller, sneakier sins. The ones that creep in through glances, dreams, accidental giggles, and warmth that lingers too long after a touch. The priest waits. You begin, "I had impure thoughts." He doesn't flinch. He probably hears it daily. But what he says next sticks with you. How many you blink? How many what he leans forward slightly? Times, acts, instances. It helps with penance. That's when you realize sin has math. Mainstream historical fact, medieval confession manuals known as penitentials often assigned specific penances based on the quantity and type of sin. For sexual acts, this could be surprisingly granular down to number of acts posture, whether one enjoyed it, and whether it was with a spouse or not. The rules read like a morbid tax code. Kissed with desire. 3 days fasting. Looked at someone lustfully. 5 Our Fathers. Touched yourself, 7 years of penance. Had sex with your spouse on a feast day. That's a sin too, 15 days penance and no meat. You wonder who keeps this ledger. You picture an angel with an abacus tallying sins like breadcrumbs. One thrust too many and oops, damnation. Better start fasting. You once saw a list pinned in the priest's study. It ranked sins from least to most severe. Number 11, carnal touch with excessive enjoyment. You laughed, quietly. He didn't. You're told that sex is permitted only within marriage and even then only for procreation. If you enjoy it too much, that's pride. If you initiate it, that's Jezebel. So you learn to lie in silence. Eyes up, lips closed, thinking of saints. Still they say women tempt men even in their sleep. Succubi, they mutter. Dream witches. You once dreamed of being kissed beneath an apple tree. You confessed it. The priest made you fast for 2 days and sleep with a blessed rock under your pillow. The rock gave you bruises. You kept the dream. Fringe tidbit. A 12th century monk named Peter the Chanter wrote that even laughter during sex could be sinful, as it suggested loss of control and excessive delight. You wonder if he ever laughed during anything. There's a woman in your village who once confessed that her husband had touched her too warmly. She was told to abstain for 40 days. He was told nothing. Because it's rarely about the act. It's about the desire. Desire, they say, is dangerous, especially for you. A man can be overcome. A woman invites it. You learn that sex is not something you do. It's something that happens to you. Even in marriage, even in faith, your role is to receive. Gratefully, passively. To want, that's another sin altogether. You meet a merchant woman, once widowed and traveling alone. She says, "I prayed for God to remove desire. He didn't, so I made peace with it instead." You want to ask what that means? She doesn't explain, but you notice her shoulders are relaxed, her eyes are clear, and her laugh is too loud to be holy. You start keeping a journal. Not about sex exactly, about hunger, thirst, want. You write, "Why is joy always punished? If my body is sin, why does God live in it I didn't ask to want?" You burn half the pages, but not all. Sometimes you feel like sin is a game you weren't taught the rules to. Or worse, a game where the rules change as soon as you start winning. One woman tells you a story, a nobleman's wife who kept track of her husband's visits in a secret book. She wrote notes, dates, his moods, her own. When she died, the book was found. The priest called it evidence of vice. Her daughter called it honesty. You think it was a miracle, because to speak plainly of pleasure is rebellion. Even with ink, even to yourself. You remember a night when your husband, long gone, now pressed his mouth to your shoulder and whispered your name like it was a prayer. For one moment, you felt whole, not ashamed, not watched, just alive. You confessed it. The priest told you to renounce pride. You never told anyone again. Mainstream doctrine said sex was holy within marriage so long as it didn't include unnatural acts. No clear list of what those acts were, of course. Just ominous suggestions, no joy, no creativity, no surprises. Missionary preferably in darkness. If you laughed, you sinned twice. You start wondering what would happen if women kept their own penitentials. 7 Hail Marys for doubting yourself. 5 days fasting for saying yes when you meant no. 12 Our Fathers for pretending not to feel. You might fill a whole book. There's a girl named Leah who asked the priest what counted as too much. He told her, if you feel anything, it's already too far. She stopped smiling after that. You haven't seen her in weeks. You wonder what happens to women who feel a lot, who want more, who enjoy not just pleasure but power in it. They probably get burned, or they disappear, or they build something quiet and untraceable. A community of secret knowledge. A circle of confession not made to priests but to each other. You imagine them meeting by moonlight, exchanging recipes and stories, naming their wants aloud. You imagine walking into that circle and not apologizing, just breathing, just being, without counting anything. Not thoughts, not touches, not sins. They say you're a gate, a door, a threshold, and the devil, he has the key. That's what the priest says anyway when he preaches on temptation. His eyes never quite meet yours when he speaks, but his gaze drifts like a candle flame in wind landing always just below the chin, just above the breastbone. You've heard the phrase, the devil's door, more than once. Sometimes in sermons, sometimes whispered after a woman dances too freely or laughs too loudly at the harvest festival. You weren't born with horns or a forked tail, but apparently you carry access to both. Mainstream historical fact. In many medieval churches, especially in England, a side entrance was known as the devil's door. During baptisms, it was left open symbolically, allowing evil to flee the body, being purified. Over time, this space became metaphorically tied to women wombs and sin. A threshold, a liability. You're a walking doorframe, apparently. And doors are judged by what passes through them. You learn quickly that movement, especially your own, is dangerous. Dancing, especially, is watched. At festivals, when the fiddles come out and the fire pit burns bright, you're allowed to step, to spin, to smile. But not too much. Never too much. Because there's a line between joy and temptation, and no one tells you where it is until you've already crossed it. There's a girl, Elfrida, who danced barefoot in the rain during St. John's Eve. She was 17. Her laughter echoed off the chapel walls. She was accused of consorting with spirits. Her penance, 40 days of silence and 3 nights tied outside in the frost. No one danced like that again. But you remember her eyes as she spun wide open, bright, defiant. You think about her whenever you move too freely. Fringe tidbit. In parts of 14th century France and Germany, outbreaks of so-called dancing plagues saw groups of women dancing uncontrollably for days. Historians speculate it was mass hysteria, ergot poisoning, or an early expression of repressed emotion. The church, however, called it possession. You wonder sometimes if possession is just what happens when joy isn't allowed anywhere else. You start to move differently. Slower, smaller. You keep your hips still when you walk. You don't twirl when your skirt catches the wind. You stop humming as you stir the pot. Because music, too, is watched. Certain melodies are said to summon impure thoughts. The devil plays the fiddle, they say. Which is odd since the priest's brother plays it, and he seems perfectly mortal, just a little drunk. But it's your hips that get blamed. Your hands. Your joy. Your desire to move. Historians still argue whether these taboos were imposed to protect women or control them. But the pattern is clear: wherever you find female energy, laughter, music, dance, someone will build a wall around it and call that wall safety. There's a widow who still dances, but only in her garden at dusk. She thinks no one sees. You do. You watch from behind the tree line as she moves slowly, hands raised like she's catching invisible rain. She looks holy. You want to join her, but you stay hidden. The devil's door follows you everywhere now. It's in the way people talk about your body. It's in the warnings about opening yourself too easily. It's in the jokes men tell when they think you're not listening. One carpenter says women are like doors. You knock enough, they open. Another replies, some don't even need knocking. You walk away. But later you scream, not out loud, just into the earth behind your house. You scream into the roots and the worms and the rot. You dig your fingers in until they're brown and bloody. You feel better after. Almost. You hear a sermon on modesty. Again. The priest quotes Saint Jerome, who once said a virgin should never leave her room, lest the devil find her through a window. You wonder if the devil is that persistent, or if Jerome was just projecting. There's another phrase. A woman dancing alone is never alone. They mean the devil. You think maybe she's just happy. You begin to choreograph your own secret dances. In your head, on your walks. Movements with meaning, but no music. Just memory. Just longing. One step for every time you were told to be still. A turn for every time your voice was hushed. A kick for every man who said you brought this on yourself. You dance in the dark when no one can see. Sometimes you forget to be afraid. Sometimes you remember. But the dance never stops. Even the midwife dances once during a birth when the baby took too long. She moved in a circle, chanting under her breath, swaying side to side. When the baby came healthy and pink, she kissed its forehead and said, "We danced her out." You asked her what the chant meant. It means the body remembers what they tried to erase. You stitched that into the hem of your sleeve. The devil's door is in you, they say. But maybe it's not a door at all. Maybe it's a stage. Maybe it's a song. Maybe it's not the devil who enters, but you who exits. You who steps out of silence. You who spins until the world bends with you. You who says, "My body is not your fear," and then dances anyway. You are not just a woman now. You are a vessel, specifically a noble vessel. And that changes everything. Marriage was a contract before, yes, but now it's policy. It's inheritance. It's diplomacy written in wombs. You are not only expected to bear children, you are expected to bear the right kind of children at the right time with the right lineage and the right gender. Mainstream historical fact. For medieval queens and noblewomen, their value was almost entirely tied to childbearing. Dynastic marriages created alliances, and producing a healthy male heir was often their sole public responsibility. Failure to do so could lead to annulment, exile, or worse, death in childbirth, which occurred with alarming frequency. The wedding feast is extravagant. You are dressed like a saint, veiled and scented, hands trembling under lace. You don't eat. Everyone else does. Everyone else watches. You become a wife before you've learned to become yourself. And then the pressure begins. He visits you that night, your new husband. He's kind in a distant, mechanical way. You lie still like they taught you. You whisper a prayer that isn't for you. You bleed a little. That pleases them. Because your body has now become a national project. You're expected to produce heirs. Not just children, heirs. That means boys, and soon. Fringe tidbit. In one French noble household, the family astrologer was consulted monthly to determine the most fertile planetary alignments for royal intercourse. If the stars were unfavorable, the couple was advised to abstain. The queen's wishes were not considered. You miss a moon, and another. You're congratulated before you've even had a chance to feel anything. Midwives are summoned, astrologers, even a painter who begins sketching your future son before he's even started forming inside you. You don't ask what happens if it's a girl. You already know. Your pregnancy is monitored like a siege campaign. You're told what to eat. Not eels, what to drink, not wine, but watered ale is fine, when to pray, when to rest, when to bathe. You are poked, measured, blessed, and constantly reminded that you carry the bloodline. You feel less like a woman, more like a reliquary. The baby arrives after 20 hours. You survive. Barely. It's a girl. Silence falls over the room. Then the slight rustle of disappointment. They try to mask it. No one succeeds. You name her anyway. A strong name. From scripture, but also from defiance. Your husband doesn't look you in the eye for 3 days. The next pregnancy comes too soon. Your body hasn't healed. The bleeding never fully stopped. But duty waits for no one. You lie in the candlelit chamber, gripping your belly and praying not for a healthy child, but for a male one. Not for his sake, for yours. Because in this world, a son is protection. A son is leverage. A son is proof. It's a boy. You're permitted a small celebration. They paint his likeness on wood. They don't paint yours. Historians still argue whether royal and noble women had real influence or merely symbolic power. But when your status depends on your uterus power, becomes a fragile and deeply conditional thing. You begin to understand why some queens pray more than others. You begin to understand why others poison. You don't pray. Not anymore. Instead, you start reading. Quietly. Carefully. The steward's assistant lends you a manuscript, a history of women saints. You're drawn not to their miracles, but to their defiance. The ones who fled marriage, the ones who disguised themselves as men, the ones who walked into fire laughing. You find your favorites, one in particular, Saint Pelagia. She danced before she preached. She refused a crown. She rode into the desert with a lion at her side. You begin writing her name into the margins of your prayer book. The court watches your every move now. They notice when you gain weight, when you look tired, when you turn down wine. Any sign could be another pregnancy, another pawn on the political board. You once overhear 2 courtiers placing bets on whether your womb will hold this time. You want to scream. Instead, you smile. You are tired, but careful. You walk in measured steps. You say polite things. You survive. Because power here is quiet. A noble woman once told you the trick is to let them believe they own the future while you raise it. She had 5 sons. She also had a knife hidden in her prayer cushion. You think about that a lot. The child grows. Your daughter. You teach her stories the court doesn't approve of. Myths where women turn into wolves. Saints who argued with angels. You teach her to walk fast, to speak softly, and to never trust a man who calls her my salvation. You start receiving visitors, other noble women, younger, wide-eyed. They ask you what to expect. You tell them the truth in pieces like breadcrumbs in the forest. Enough to follow, not enough to choke. One asks if it ever stops feeling like duty. You say no, but you get better at carving freedom between the cracks. There's a rumor that your husband is seeing a wet nurse too often, that he's fathered a child outside your marriage. You're not shocked. You're not even angry. You're calculating. Because you know now the rules are stricter for you, but not for him. He can sin. You must repent for him. He can father bastards. You must raise heirs. He can speak. You must embody the silence. And yet, despite all of that, you feel stronger now. Not free, but awake. Because you've learned to move beneath the rules, to weaponize the expectations, to cloak your ambition in maternal concern, to turn lullabies into strategy. You look at your daughter and wonder if she'll inherit the cage or the key. You plan to leave her both. You're not noble, not cloistered, not a saint in stained glass. You're a peasant girl, and that means the rules still apply, just with fewer candles and more mud. Your body isn't painted or political. It's practical. It works. It bleeds. It lifts. It bends. It feeds others before it feeds itself. You don't wear silk, you wear wool stiffened by sweat. But make no mistake, your body is still under watch, especially by those with power. And when a man of status notices you, it's rarely a compliment. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval rural society, peasant women were vulnerable to exploitation by landlords, clergy, and anyone in a position of authority. Consent was often ambiguous or irrelevant. While law existed to punish assault, it rarely favored the word of a working-class woman against that of a nobleman. It begins in the hayloft. You're 14, maybe 15. He's older, richer, wearing boots with too much polish for someone who's never cleaned a stall. He brings you bread, smiles, asks your name like it's poetry. You think it might be kindness, but the bread has strings, the smile an edge. The next time he finds you, his hands are faster. He doesn't ask your name again. You don't scream. Because what would that change? No one's listening. Not for you. You're called touched after that. Not by angels, just touched. And once you're touched, the rules change. You're no longer invited to help in the bakehouse. You're no longer trusted near the priest's wine. You're no longer the girl with quick fingers and a kind laugh. Now you're the one from the hayloft. They never say his name, just yours. Fringe tidbit. In many villages, flirting by peasant girls was used as legal justification for dismissing or minimizing accusations of abuse. A smile, a joke, even a flower tucked behind the ear could be twisted into evidence of inviting misconduct. You start dressing in gray. You stop singing. You cut your hair. You make yourself small. But smallness doesn't save you. You're not the only one. There's Greta, who came back from the mill crying. There's Ilsa, who stopped speaking after the bishop's nephew visited. There's little Martha, 12, who miscarried in the cold behind the bread oven. No one claimed the child. No one claimed her either. You learn that flirtation is something men assign to you after the fact. That being desired is not a compliment, it's a verdict. You hear women say she should have known better. You hear men say she's lucky he even noticed. You hear silence. Most often you hear silence. Historians still argue whether rural women had any real recourse for protection. Technically, they could bring complaints. But when the judge is the Lord's cousin and the priest's brother was involved, the answer is usually a shrug. You ask the midwife once, "What do we do?" She says, "We survive." You ask again, "But what can we do?" She says, "Keep track." So you start remembering, not just names, eyes, voices, the way a hand lingered too long, the taste of fear behind a barn door, the shape of a bruise before it fades. You write it in your mind like a book no one's allowed to read. One night a girl pushes back. Her name is Sabina. She's 17. She slaps the tanner's apprentice across the face when he tries to grab her skirt. People gasp. The tanner's wife demands punishment, but the miller's wife stands beside Sabina. Then the alewife. Then the midwife. A quiet wall of women. The punishment never comes. Instead, they call her difficult for months. Still, something shifts. You start carrying a needle in your bodice, not to stab, just to remind yourself you could. There are stories of girls who ran away. Not many. Some joined traveling players. Some became servants in cities where anonymity could buy a scrap of peace. Some just disappeared. You think about leaving, but the road is dangerous, and your mother's bones are buried here. So you stay, and you watch. You see how the boys become men without asking permission. You see how girls learn shame before they learn how to read. You see how no one ever says the word rape. They say taken advantage. They say fell. They say got herself into trouble. And yet some girls fight back. Quietly. Cleverly. There's Anna who swapped the labels on the village ale barrels and got the reeve drunk on watery dregs. There's Emmy who pretended to have a spirit inside her so the priest would stop touching her. He left rattled. She stayed safe. There's you. You begin teaching the younger girls how to walk fast, how to lie well, how to spot a bad glance before it becomes a bad hand. You teach them how to spit without being seen, how to smile with teeth hidden, how to survive. Mainstream records rarely mention these moments. The chronicles are filled with battles, kings, abbeys, and saints, but never this. The look a girl gives another girl to say I know. The hand squeezed under a table. The flower left on a doorstep after a hard night. These are not legends, but they're yours. You think one day maybe someone will write them down. Maybe that someone is you. The night they arrive, the air is thick with smoke and perfume, equal parts danger and mystery. They call themselves pilgrims, but their robes are too fine, their rings too heavy, and their eyes too knowing. They bring relics, they bring stories, they bring the Inquisition. Not the roaring flame and rack of your nightmares, at least not yet. First, it's a scroll, a list, a declaration in Latin pinned to the church door with a neat hand. It says, "Let heresy be rooted out as rot from the vine, and you are the vine," or close enough. Mainstream historical fact. The medieval Inquisition, beginning formally in the 12th century and expanding in later centuries, was a church-led effort to identify and eliminate heresy. Though it varied by region, inquisitorial investigations often targeted women, especially midwives, healers, and the overly curious for supposed heretical practices. They set up in the chapel. They take confessions, ask questions, offer leniency for those who come clean. The line stretches long. No one wants to be noticed, not attending. You go, of course. You say all the right things. You confess to pride, to laziness, to unruly thoughts. You stop short of naming others. That's the trick. Don't name names. Don't draw a map. The Inquisitor is thin with parchment skin and a voice that sounds like a creaking floorboard. He smiles too much for someone who asks about Satan daily. He asks, "Have you ever spoken to a woman about visions?" You say no. You remember 3. He asks, "Do you know of any gatherings outside church hours?" You say no. You remember 7. He asks, "Do you understand the grave sin of harboring forbidden texts?" You nod. Your hidden pages feel warm under your bodice. Fringe tidbit. Some inquisitors used a technique called the question extraordinary, which was a euphemism for torture. But in early stages, psychological games were more common: repeated questioning, sleep deprivation threats, and public humiliation. Fire was often the last tool, not the first. They inspect houses next. They find dried herbs and call them witch signs. They find red thread and call it spellbinding. They find a carved figurine, probably a child's toy, and call it a familiar. You learn fast: clean your shelves, hide your sharp things, burn your lavender. You also learn it doesn't matter. If they want to find something, they will. There's a widow named Anik who once claimed she saw the Virgin in a field of thistles. She described the vision to a friend and a friend to another friend, and within 2 days the Inquisitors arrived. They found no proof, but she wept when they asked if she was tempted by dark voices. Now she doesn't speak at all. You see her once staring into a basin of water like it holds answers she's afraid to hear. You ask the midwife, "Why do they fear us so much?" She says, "Because we remember what they've tried to forget." Historians still argue whether the Inquisitions were mostly political, theological, or social suppression. But what's certain is that it targeted the different, and women by nature lived close to that edge. You keep your head low. You stop attending the secret readings. You stop reading at all. But then one night you're summoned again. To the chapel. Privately. The Inquisitor asks about your neighbor, the weaver. She has a daughter with different eyes, he says. Green, bright, unnatural. You say like moss on a riverbank. He frowns. You're told to report back if the girl behaves strangely. She's 5. You go home. You burn nothing this time. Instead, you leave her a small, carved bird. Quiet and winged. You whisper "fly" before they clip you. And still the search continues. Women begin disappearing. Not in fire, but in silence. Sent to distant convents, to foreign relatives, to cells beneath cathedrals. For their protection, the church says, or for yours. You attend one last inquiry. They ask again about your writings. You say, "What could a woman possibly write worth reading?" They laugh. You laugh with them. You never laugh again. One girl confesses under pressure. She says she read forbidden texts, that she danced under the moon, that she saw a crow and thought it spoke. She names no one. They call her a penitent. They shave her head and send her to labor in the laundry. You catch her singing there once, soft and sharp, like wind through reeds, and it hits you. They can take your books, your herbs, your name, but not your memory, not your knowing. So you begin again, small. In the dirt, you trace symbols no one sees. In your bread, you shape silent prayers. You braid your hair in patterns older than scripture. You bury a scrap of your writing in a jar beneath the old oak. Just one sentence: "They fear us because we remember being whole." And somewhere beneath the scrutiny and smoke you do. You remember. You are the vine. And what they call rot is just the fruit they couldn't taste. You stand at the market edge watching as women haggle for fish and figs, as carts creak over cobblestones, and chickens peck at crumbs near the gallows post. No one notices the girl sweeping near the scaffold base. No one looks too long at the stains that never wash out. Justice here is a public event. It's theater. And lately, it stars women. Mainstream historical fact, public punishment for women in the Middle Ages varied by location and offense. Adultery, gossip, theft, or heresy could lead to shaming rituals like the pillory, the ducking stool, or forced penance walks, often with shaved heads or marked clothing. Execution wasn't always fire or sword. Sometimes it was humiliation by inches. This week, it's a penitent parade. A woman barefoot, hair-hacked short walks in silence through the square in a shift marked with an ash cross. She holds a candle half her height. Her crime, sleeping with a man, not her husband, though she says he forced her. He walks beside her, fully dressed, with his wife. The crowd jeers at her. You know her name. She used to sell pickled onions by the West Gate. She used to sing as she worked. Now she hums quietly the same song. You think it's defiance. Someone else calls it madness. You've learned that for women, punishment isn't just about law. It's about display. Fringe tidbit. In parts of England and Flanders, women accused of slander or excessive gossip were punished with a brank, an iron mask fitted with a spiked bit to press the tongue down. Sometimes they were led through town on a rope like livestock. You once asked why men aren't paraded for gossip. The priest said men speak truths, women speak trouble. You laughed. He didn't. There's a well near the village edge rumored to be cursed. But really, it's where women leave messages, scratched into stones, knotted into ribbons tied around branches. Not full letters, just marks, warnings, names, directions. One says she was taken. South Road, cart with blue tarp. You don't know who wrote it, but you memorize it anyway. The market begins selling hair ribbons again, bright ones, red mostly, meant to signal piety or property. A man buys 3, the girl behind him buys none. She wears a strip of plain cloth instead, the color of wet ash. Later, you see that same cloth in the ducking pond. Historians still debate whether medieval punishments aimed to reform or merely control. But from here, it looks like theater designed to teach you who not to become. There's a widow who won't remarry. Says she likes her own bed. She's fined for refusal of duty. Her goats are seized. You offer her a loaf of bread. She thanks you with a grin and spits in the sheriff's direction. You call her brave. She calls herself tired. One girl wears her old betrothal ring on a chain around her neck. The man died before the wedding, and now she refuses every suitor. She's accused of bitterness. One merchant claims she hexed his crops. She's fined. She gives them a single coin warm from her chest. You begin to see the cracks in the law, in the church, in the silence. There's a nun who walks barefoot now, muttering scripture in reverse. She claims it purifies, it filters out the patriarchal edits. You don't know if it's true, but you listen. And then one day, a woman is burned. Not for murder, not even for heresy, for corruption of the flesh and mind. The list of her sins is long but vague. There's mention of herbs, a red dress, too many lovers, and a book with no title. You attend. You tell yourself it's to bear witness, but deep down you want to see how close the flames get. She doesn't scream. She looks straight ahead, past the crowd, past the sky. You wonder what she sees. When it's over, the crowd scatters like crows startled by thunder. You remain. You gather a handful of ash in your apron. You don't know why. Later that night, you bury it beneath the steps of the chapel. Not to curse, not to honor, to remember. You begin walking differently, Not faster, not bolder, but less bent. You start braiding your hair again, small plaits easy to hide under a veil. You speak a little louder when trading eggs. You sharpen your kitchen knife slower, longer, so the sound carries. There's a rhythm to rebellion. Not with swords, with spoons, with glances, with words exchanged over onions and firewood. You meet women who are watching like you, listening, waiting. You begin to meet quietly after dusk, not with candles or chanting, just shared space. Silent meals, bread passed with one hand, scraps of cloth marked with chalk exchanged without words. You call it the unnamed. You don't call it anything else. You trade remedies again, carefully. You trade stories, carefully. You trade hope, carefully. One woman speaks of leaving, another of staying and raising her daughter without fear. Another says she'll confess again, lie again, and burn their records. No one speaks of revenge, only survival, only memory, only change. You stitch a new sentence into your hem, they cannot shame what we name ourselves. You see others doing the same. Soon skirts whisper more than prayers ever could. The wind shifts the way it does before a storm, dry low, humming against the bone. You feel it even before the bells toll. A ripple. Not fear exactly. Not yet. But something close. It begins with a rumor. A girl in the next village over was caught reciting scripture without a man present. No priest. No father. Just her and a page from the book of Judith. They say she emphasized the part where Judith beheads Holofernes. Twice. They say her voice didn't tremble. They say her hands didn't shake when they bound her. Mainstream historical fact. The medieval church strictly limited scriptural interpretation to male clergy. Women reading scripture, especially aloud, especially to other women, was seen as subversive, even heretical. In some regions, possession of certain texts could lead to severe punishment, including imprisonment or public penance. You've read Judith too. You don't say that out loud. Instead, you nod when others cluck their tongues and call the girl foolish. You say tisk, a shame. You even cross yourself just for show. But later you whisper Judith's name like a secret weapon. In the night, more women gather. Not many. Enough. You sit in silence in the back of the grain shed on old sacks and damp planks. No chants, no candles, just breath. One speaks. Quietly. She read the words and wasn't afraid. Another answers. So now they want to burn her. You say nothing. You just listen. That's how it starts, again, because this isn't the first time and it won't be the last. Fringe tidbit. A lesser-known heretical sect in the 13th century, the Beguinages was led in part by women who read and interpreted scripture communally. While not all were punished, several were tried for heresy, not for what they believed, but for believing it together. The girl's fate is undecided. She's held under guard. The priest calls it pastoral care. But the guard has a sword, and her room has no window. They say she hums in the morning, the Psalms. They say the humming is steady. One woman wants to act. Break her out, she says. Start a fire. Make them chase smoke while we steal her. Another says they'll catch us. Another, then let them. You sit in the silence and realize you're already free. Not entirely, but enough. You've been naming yourself bit by bit for years, with your hidden words, with your needle prayers, with your careful laughter, and now you speak. She read scripture. So did we. They look at you. She spoke truth. So will we. Someone nods. The storm finally breaks. Rain. Heavy cleansing. You stand under it until your sleeves stick and your shoes fill. No one stops you. Later you return home. You take out every scrap of hidden writing, every stitch and phrase and tucked away page. You sew them into a single cloth. It's not a banner, not yet. But it's more than scraps now. It's memory. It's voice. It's a story. And it's yours. Historians still argue whether women in the Middle Ages truly resisted, whether the glimpses of defiance knowledge, secret gatherings amounted to anything, whether it was rebellion or simply survival. Let them argue. You were there. You remember the girl who read Judith, the widow who refused to bow, the nun who scribbled love poems on vellum, the weaver who sang in the stocks, the midwife who taught you herbs and fear and hope. You remember them all. You carry them now, in cloth, in bone, in breath, in voice. You stand before your daughter, older now, and tell her a story. Not from the saints, not from the priest, from you. And she listens. She asks questions. She laughs in the right places. And then she says, "Tell it again." And you do. Because you survived. Because the silence cracked. Because a woman's voice is not a sin. It's an inheritance. It's a map. It's a spell. It's a future. You place the cloth in her hands. She traces the words, the seams, the symbols. She doesn't ask what they mean. She already knows. So now, as we close this long walk through silence and sin, through the stiff wool of law and the soft defiance sewn in skirts, take a moment to breathe. Let your thoughts slow your hands, rest your body, remember it is yours. The rain has passed. The ashes are cool. The bells have stopped echoing. You stand not in a courtroom or a chapel or a field, but in the space between stories, where the women whisper not to be heard, but to be held, not punished, but named. Maybe you still feel the weight of all that, watching the rules, the candles, the questions, but it's quieter now, dimmer, softer. The fire is out, the doors are shut, and the world, just for now, is gentle. Let the names drift like smoke through your thoughts. Let them settle. The abbess who held her tongue like a dagger, the girl who danced anyway, the mother who didn't repent for wanting more. They're all resting now. So can you. You did survive this, even if others didn't. Even if the world didn't change, you remember. That's enough for tonight. So roll onto your side, close your eyes, let the room fade, let your breath deepen, let that distant velvet dark cover you like a familiar veil, and know this, you were never really silent. Just waiting for the right story to carry your voice. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.